Chapter 1372. Humph! Xiao Hua's heart was filled with ruthlessness. He waved his hand and took out a marrow-cleansing pill from a space. He swallowed it in one gulp and silently operated his cultivation method. On one hand, he refined the medicinal efficacy of the marrow-cleansing pill to supplement the loss of true qi in his meridians. On the other hand, he stirred up his magic power and flew forward. Normally, Xiao Hua would need 4 hours to refine the medicinal power of the marrow-cleansing pill. But now that it was a matter of life and death, he couldn't care about anything else. He urged his true qi to circulate in his meridians, rapidly refining the medicinal power. After the medicinal power was refined, the true qi was transformed into magic power to support Xiao Hua's flight. On the other hand, it made up for the true qi that had been swallowed by the fog beast. Soon, in the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, the marrow-cleansing pill was refined. The time it took was much shorter than usual. Logically speaking, Xiao Hua's meridians should have been overwhelmed by such a barbaric refinement of the marrow-cleansing pill and circulating true qi in his meridians without regard for anything else. It should have even caused some damage. But, contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, his meridians were abnormally tough. He didn't feel any discomfort at all. Refining the marrow-cleansing pill like this was just enough to make up for the loss of true qi. Fight! Xiao Hua knew that now was not the time to hesitate. He sent another marrow-cleansing pill into the air and maintained his original flight speed, constantly flying into the depths of Yulian Mountains. In Xiao Hua's perception, he was flying in a straight line, but the real situation was not like this. In a huge mass of clouds, Xiao Hua's flight path was an extremely irregular circle. This circle was tightly wrapped in the clouds. Similarly, in the middle of Xiao Hua's circle, Li Xiaowen, Fu Shu, and Sun Fian were the same as Xiao Hua, each of them flying around an irregular circle with great effort. They were the same as Xiao Hua, all of them recklessly taking out medicinal pills that could replenish their true energy from their storage pouches. However, they were different from Xiao Hua. Their faces were extremely panicked, and there was even some despair in their eyes. In particular, Fu Shu's cultivation was slightly weaker than the other two, and the range of his flight was also smaller. After 6 hours, when the medicinal pills in his storage bag were used up, the speed of his flight gradually slowed down, and the rate at which his true qi was flowing out also gradually increased. Seeing that he could no longer replenish his qi, Fu Shu's face turned red. He clapped his hands, and the fireball talisman he bought from the Feng clan's EG appeared. He activated his Fa Li and threw it out. What made Fu Shu despair was that the fireball talisman that would normally explode as soon as it was thrown out was currently wrapped up by the thick, watery cloud just as it was in midair. Only a faint flame flashed before it was annihilated. No! Fu Shu screamed in fear, but his voice only traveled a short distance. Immediately after, Fu Shu seemed to have gone mad. He took out all the yellow talismans he had and threw them all out without caring about the loss of his Fa Li. Unfortunately, all the yellow talismans were like clay oxen entering the sea. They couldn't even set off half a wave, and Fu Shu's true qi was exhausted in this final struggle. Following the exhaustion of his true qi, Fu Shu no longer had a trace of magic power to activate the flying talisman. His entire body fell to the ground. Oh! Perhaps it couldn't be said to be the ground anymore, but rather the slightly trembling cloud. This cloud was ice cold. When Fu Shu's body fell, his face immediately turned pale. Because he didn't have any magic power to defend himself, the cloud immediately wrapped around his body. Fu Shu only had time to struggle a few times before he lost all his strength. Soon after, he was swallowed by the white, viscous cloud and disappeared without a trace. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were with Fu Shu. Their cultivations were slightly higher than Fu Shu's, but their circumstances weren't much better. At this time, they were also at the end of their rope. They were clenching their teeth and making a final, futile struggle. Looking at Xiao Hua again, in the span of 6 hours, he had already finished consuming the remaining 20 or so marrow-cleansing pills he had obtained from Yongshan. He had even taken another 10 marrow cleansing pills that he had just obtained from the Foam family's EG. His true energy was maintained, and his magic power was also maintained. However, his cultivation base was continuously improving along with the circulation of his true energy and the refinement of the medicinal power. And with the increase of his cultivation, Xiao Hua's flying speed became even faster. As Xiao Hua's flying speed increased, the circle he was flying in also continuously increased in size. He gradually approached the edge of the huge cloud. After Fu Shu disappeared, in the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Xiao Hua took another marrow cleansing pill. Just as he finished refining the marrow cleansing pill, his speed suddenly increased. His figure, which was originally flying in a circle, suddenly rushed out in a straight line. Not only that, just as he was flying in a straight line, the tip of the demonic spear that Xiao Hua had been holding in his hand all this time seemed to have been pierced by a layer of faintly discernible membrane. With a kind of faint schwa sound, the clouds and mist around Xiao Hua began to violently boil. The boiling rapidly spread, and the clouds and mist within a radius of several thousand zhang were churning. Xiao Hua, who had been observing the true qi in his body all this time, didn't seem to know that he was already flying in a straight line. All he knew was that he was extremely pleasantly surprised to see that his true qi had suddenly increased. The true qi produced by refining the marrow cleansing pill didn't seem to have leaked out. Did I rush out? Xiao Hua was pleasantly surprised as he thought. This young master has been flying for 6 hours. I'm afraid that I've traveled several thousand li. This cloud mist beast, why is it even bigger than Yulianshan? Thinking this, Xiao Hua patted his storage pouch and took out the consecutive note talisman. He urged his transcendence energy, and the consecutive note talisman let out a sharp whistle and flew behind Xiao Hua. It's flying in the opposite direction. Seeing this, Xiao Hua was very pleasantly surprised. Without the slightest hesitation, he chased after the consecutive note talisman's sharp whistle and turned around to fly. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian, who were extremely far away from Xiao Hua, were originally on the verge of despair. The true qi in their bodies had already been exhausted. Their faces were ashen as they prepared to make a final struggle, like Fu Shu. However, they suddenly felt that their true qi was no longer flowing out. Instead, as their true qi circulated in their meridians, new true qi appeared. Although they didn't know what had happened, they knew in their hearts that this seemed to be a turning point. Thinking the same as Xiao Hua, they immediately took out the consecutive note talisman. Seeing the consecutive note talisman fly away, how could they not know that they had escaped? Desperately urging their last trace of transcendence energy, they chased after the consecutive note talisman and rushed out. In the time it took to eat half a meal, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian flew out of the clouds of Yulianshan from different places. Li Xiaowen was the first to rush out. Facing him was Fan Daomao, who was anxiously and somewhat pleasantly surprised, standing in front of the clouds. Li Xiaowen's consecutive note talisman had stopped in front of Fan Daomao. Seeing Li Xiaowen come out, Fan Daomao took 2 steps forward and called out, "Fellow Taoist Li." Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Li Xiaowen's figure fell from midair and fell straight to the ground. The transcendence energy in his body had been completely exhausted. Li Xiaowen didn't have time to say anything to Fan Daomao. He sat down cross-legged, his palms facing the sky, and circulated his cultivation method to recover his transcendence energy. Seeing this, how could Fan Daomao not know? He immediately stopped and stood there, not daring to disturb Li Xiaowen. Just as Fan Daomao stopped, another consecutive note talisman flew out, and Sun Fian flew out from another place in a sorry state. Like Li Xiaowen, Sun Fian had just flown out of the clouds of Yulianshan when he fell to the ground. Then, with Fan Daomao's support, he went to a place slightly further away and hurriedly recovered his transcendence energy. Then, the clouds of the entire Yulianshan regained their calm, and no more consecutive note talismans flew out from within. Fan Daomao looked at the calm clouds, and cold sweat broke out on his back. Of the 4 people who went in, Only the two with the strongest cultivation came out alive. The other two were probably already dead. Fortunately, I was quick-witted and found a reason not to go in. Otherwise, Fan Dao Mao suddenly felt a wave of lingering fear. He shrunk his neck and was about to walk back. But at this moment, from an extremely far-away direction, another consecutive note talisman flew out from the clouds. Following that consecutive note talisman was a tall and thin figure that immediately darted out from the clouds. Looking at the flying speed, it was almost catching up to the consecutive note talisman. Xiao Hua. Seeing that figure, Fan Dao Mao was immediately shocked. Xiao Hua's cultivation was the lowest. How'd he come out alive? But thinking about how Xiao Hua could kill a 6th-level Qi refinement disciple of the Feng family, it was normal for him to come out alive. Xiao Hua wasn't like Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian, who fell to the ground as soon as they came out of the clouds. Instead, he quickly flew in front of Fan Dao Mao and cupped his hands in greeting. Fellow Taoist Fan, did fellow Taoist Li and the others come out? Fan Dao Mao didn't dare to be negligent. He cupped his hands and said, "Let me tell you, fellow Taoist Xiao, fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun just came out, but because their transcendence energy was exhausted, they're recuperating over there. As for fellow Taoist Fu, he still hasn't come out. So it's like this." Xiao Hua used his hand to pinch his chin and looked at the fog of Yu Lian Shan from the side. Fellow Taoist Xiao, could it be that you want to go save fellow Taoist Fu? Fan Dao Mao probed. Sai Xiao Hua sighed. Admittedly, I have the heart, but I don't have the strength to spare. Moreover, according to what I encountered inside, I'm afraid fellow Taoist Fu has already perished. The cloud mist beast was indeed frightening. It was 100 times more frightening than any opponent or demonic beast Sun Shang had encountered. Although the Ice Worm King of Nan Kaiping was formidable, but he could still encounter it. If he wasn't a match for it, perhaps he could escape far away, or use some top-grade fireball talisman to deal with it for a while. But this cloud mist beast was simply impossible to guard against. Unwittingly, he was swallowed into its stomach. Now, according to Xiao Hua's thoughts, if he hadn't coincidentally obtained dozens of marrow-cleansing pills in the space, and if he hadn't taken a lot of them within 6 hours and increased his cultivation by a bit, his flying speed would have surpassed that of an 11th-level Qi refinement cultivator and directly caught up to that of a 12th-level Qi refinement cultivator. In terms of speed, he had surpassed the cloud mist beast's control and escaped from its body. Otherwise, even if Xiao Hua could fly and had immense strength, he would have only met the same fate as Fu Shu. It was just that this fate was different sooner or later. Thinking of his own bitter experience, Xiao Hua's heart was filled with lingering fear. How could he possibly dare to enter the cloud mist beast to save someone? Just as he was speaking, Xiao Hua suddenly felt his qi and blood surging within his body. It was something he had never encountered before. Not daring to be negligent, he cupped his hands towards Fan Dao Mao and sat down cross-legged. He also began to circulate his cultivation method and adjust his breathing. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for it. Chapter 1373. Xiao Hua circulated his true qi through his meridians, and only then did he check his cultivation base. Xiao Hua almost jumped up from the ground. The night before Xiao Hua entered the fog of the Yulian Mountains, he had just taken 5 marrow cleansing pills, and his cultivation had barely entered the middle of the second layer of the Qi refining realm. In just 6 hours, his cultivation had actually advanced by leaps and bounds, directly reaching the late stage of the second layer of the Qi refining realm. There was even hope for him to break through to the third layer of the Qi refining realm. However, when Xiao Hua suppressed his ecstatic mood and calmly thought about it, he understood in his heart. Although it had only been 6 hours, he had taken more than 30 marrow cleansing pills in one go. This was equivalent to 10 years of bitter cultivation. In addition to the marrow cleansing pills and other medicinal pills he had taken before, it was almost equivalent to 20 years of bitter cultivation. Others had used 1 or 2 years of time, but he had actually used 20 years of bitter cultivation to barely reach the late stage of the second layer of chi refining. This really made people speechless. Of course, he had used 6 hours to refine more than 30 marrow-cleansing pills, and most of the residual medicinal power was distributed in his meridians. The sudden increase in his cultivation base also made his meridians very uncomfortable, which was why his chi and blood were surging. Knowing the reason, Xiao Hua was relieved. Following Shang Huaming's cultivation method, he refined the residual medicinal power in his meridians bit by bit, slowly stabilizing his cultivation base. Seeing Xiao Hua, Li Xiaowen, and Sun Fian all sitting cross-legged and adjusting their breathing, Fan Daomao couldn't help but feel a bit irritated. As soon as the three of them left the fog, they hurriedly recovered their magic power and didn't say anything to him. Although he knew that Fu Shu had fallen in Yulian Mountains, he still didn't know who had sent the silk bag. If Fu Shu's silk bag hadn't been opened, even if the three of them escaped, their treasure-hunting path could be considered cut off. They could only return to Jingbo City, with no possibility of advancing any further. How could he not be anxious? After wandering around for a while, the sky gradually darkened. Xiao Hua and the others didn't get up, so Fan Daomao had no choice but to sit down and cultivate. Soon, the night arrived. Inside Xiao Hua's space, the reverse light stopped rotating. Boundless starlight fell down, and starlight seeped into every part of Xiao Hua's body. Along with the medicinal efficacy in his meridians, it was refined into his true chi bit by bit. The stars moved, and the night quickly passed. When the first ray of sunlight shone from the east, Xiao Hua opened his eyes, and a faintly discernible flame flashed in his eyes. Xiao Hua opened his mouth, and a bit of sun essence was sucked into his body. Congratulations, fellow Taoist Xiao. I'm about to break through to the third layer of chi refining. Li Xiaowen's voice sounded from behind Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua turned around with a smile, looked at Li Xiaowen, and also said, Congratulations, congratulations. Fellow Taoist, Li's cultivation has also improved. It seems like you're about to break through to the fifth layer of chi refining. I'm still far inferior to you, fellow Taoist. Io, fellow Taoist Sun, your cultivation is also the same as fellow Taoist Li's. I really have to congratulate you. Xiao Hua saw Sun Fian walking over and also cupped his hand with a smile. Sun Fian bitterly smiled and shook his head. His face carried a trace of joy, but also a trace of fear. He said, Although I've improved, the price is really big. If it wasn't for the life and death struggle in the mist, it would be impossible for me to advance by leaps and bounds. Fellow Taoist Fu still hasn't come out. Xiao Hua looked around and said regretfully, I haven't seen you for a night. I'm afraid. AI, yesterday's situation was really critical. Li Xiaowen sighed and said, I flew up, but I couldn't see your figures. I knew that only by constantly flying forward could I have a chance to escape. But after flying for more than 6 hours, just as I was about to give up, a turn for the better appeared. I already asked fellow Taoist Sun. He had the same experience as I. I don't know how fellow Taoist Xiao is. Xiao Hua said with a smile. I was the same as fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun. I was flying the whole time. The moment I escaped was about the same as the two of you. There was nothing unusual. But Li Xiaowen still felt a bit strange. Originally, Xiao Hua's flying speed was extremely fast, but he escaped after the two of them. If he didn't encounter something, how could he be late? Besides, 4 people were trapped and 3 people escaped. If it wasn't for some unforeseen event, how could 3 low-level aura refining cultivators escape from the stomach of a Foundation establishment cloud mist beast? Li Xiaowen knew that he didn't have such ability, and Sun Fian shouldn't have either. So the reason naturally fell on Xiao Hua's head. As for Xiao Hua himself, although he vaguely felt that it had something to do with him, after all, it was only a speculation. He couldn't take the credit for it, so he could only shake his head. Alas, no matter what, the 3 of you were able to escape, and you also know that the next place we are going to is Yunqi Marsh. Fan Daomao's gloomy expression was swept away as he spoke. And that's right. Sun Fian nodded. Although fellow Taoist Fu died, after all, his spinneret has been opened. It could be considered that he didn't die in vain. Xiao Hua sighed slightly. There were some calculations in his heart. These 6 places, 6 spinnerets, one for each of the 6 people. They had just passed through 2 places and 2 people had already died. The next 4 places, he didn't know how many people would survive. The true curtain of this treasure hunt hadn't been drawn yet, but the tragic deaths were far from what Xiao Hua had imagined when he left Jingbo City that day. Why does it feel like this is a test of our cultivation? Xiao Hua inwardly thought. According to what fellow Taoist Ma said, these previous operations were also like this. Could it be that some loose cultivators with insufficient cultivation were eliminated midway? And in the end, only the elites remained? Heaven Forsaken's method is a bit strange, but survival of the fittest is also normal. Could it be? Heaven Forsaken wants to use this treasure hunt to wash away the dregs that joined Heaven Forsaken, only leaving behind the elites among the loose cultivators? And the goal of leaving behind the elites, is it the same as Jingbo City, to become a force of their own? Xiao Hua was thinking a bit too far. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Although Li Xiaowen didn't know whether Yu Lianshan's escape had anything to do with Xiao Hua, in his heart, he already had a whole new level of respect for Xiao Hua. When he spoke, he was a lot more respectful. Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't be sad. Cultivators like us go against the heavens and have the possibility of being eliminated at any moment. And loose cultivators like us are even more miserable. Fellow Taoist Fu's experience is also common in the cultivation world. Let's take this as a warning and pay more attention. Many thanks for fellow Taoist Li's reminder. Xiao Hua cupped his hands in thanks. Let's go, fellow Taoist Xiao. Yunxi Marsh is 5 days away from here. We still need to hurry. Fan Dao Mao reminded. That's how it should be. Sun Fian looked back at Yu Lianshan with lingering fear. This place, even if I stay here for a moment longer, I will still panic. It's better to leave as soon as possible. The 4 of them started their journey again and flew in the other direction of Yu Lianshan. After flying for a while, Xiao Hua suddenly asked, Fellow Taoist Li, I have something to ask. Fellow Taoist Xiao, there's no harm in asking. Li Xiaowen was very amiable. I want to know, from Jingbo City to Southern Colorping to Yu Lianshan and now to Yunxi Marsh, these few places, do they have any relation? How should I put it? I just feel that through these few places, we can find out the approximate location of our final destination. Li Xiaowen smiled bitterly and looked at Fan Dao Mao and Sun Fian. This question, to be honest, fellow Taoist Xiao, I also thought about it for a long time. I presume fellow Taoist Fan and fellow Taoist Sun have also thought about it, and Fan Dao Mao and Sun Fian both nodded. It's a pity. Looking at your expressions, I'm afraid you two have no clue at all, just like I, right? Exactly. Fan Dao Mao sighed. Southern Color Ping, Yu Lianshan, and Yunxi Marsh are originally a triangle. There's a huge gap in the middle. In this area, I also didn't hear of any special places to pay attention to. If it said that there's some treasure in Southern Color Ping or Yu Lianshan, I could believe it, but unfortunately, these 2 places are just passing by. The most puzzling thing is that apart from these 3 places, we still have 2 more places to go. Only the last thread can tell us the specific places. Where those 2 places are, we also don't know. I have 2 questions. Xiao Hua looked at the quiet sky in the distance and said, One is, there are more than 100 loose cultivators in our Heaven Forsaken. There are also dozens of teams. Don't tell me, they also have to go through so many dangerous places? Alas, our country of Xi is vast and rich in resources. There are too many dangerous places. Not to mention Tingyin Yuan, one of the top 10 dangerous places, even Mo, Zhao Black Forest, Yinlin Mountain Swamp, and other places are not much worse than Tingyin Yuan. It's just that they aren't famous. And there are even more dangerous places like Southern Colorping and Yu Lianshan that even I, a loose cultivator, have the courage to enter. It's really easy for Heaven Forsaken to pick out some of these places. Li Xiaowen smiled bitterly. Xiao Hua nodded and asked again, I have a second question. These dangerous places, even if they have their own characteristics, how can fellow Taoist Qing go to each of these places one by one? Moreover, only special spinnerets can be opened in special places. In the cultivation world, there are countless spells and magical powers. Everyone has their own secrets. Even fellow Taoist Xiao. I'm afraid he has spells that we can't reach, let alone fellow Taoist Qing. Sun Fian shook his head slightly. Xiao Hua still didn't give up. Southern Color Ping has ice worms and an extremely cold climate. Yulianshan has fog beasts and clouds that don't disperse for years. These should be the factors that activate the spells and the threads, right? What's so special about Yinshi Zhe? Maybe we don't have to go to the truly dangerous places. We can open the threads in places that are similar to these places? Haha, fellow Taoist, Zhao's idea is really interesting. However, it's not that we haven't thought of this before, but as long as there are places similar to Yu Lianshan and Southern Color Ping, there are also demonic beasts. The ice worms and fog beasts are only at the second stage. The other places are at the third and fourth stage. They're far from what loose cultivators like us can handle. Fan Daomao explained to Xiao Hua with a smile. Alas, so it's like this. Xiao Hua was speechless. It seemed that he could only follow Qing Fengmin's arrangement and take it step by step. Chapter 1374. In the next 5 days, Li Xiaowen and the others were extra careful. Nothing special happened, but the weather became more and more rainy. From time to time, there would be continuous drizzling and even torrential downpours, which slightly delayed their journey. During these 5 days, whenever Xiao Hua rested at night, he would take marrow cleansing pills. Although each marrow cleansing pill was only equivalent to 4 months of bitter cultivation, Xiao Hua's cultivation was gradually improving step by step as he took them one after another. In addition to the nighttime cultivation, Xiao Hua also stepped up his cultivation during the day. Even during the flight, he mobilized his true qi and circulated it in his meridians according to the circulation. Xiao Hua was only at the second level of the qi refining realm. This kind of cultivation speed was indeed a bit fast, but in Li Xiaowen's eyes, it didn't seem that surprising. After all, they also came from the low level of the qi refining realm. The second level of the qi refining realm was just the beginning of cultivation, so it really didn't count as anything. On this day, it was raining cats and dogs. Everyone used their defensive yellow talismans to form a transparent light shield around their bodies, blocking the rain outside. There wasn't a trace of rain on their Taoist robes, and they were as dry as usual. Fortunately, there isn't any thunder in the rain. Otherwise, today would be like yesterday, hiding in the cave and quietly cultivating. Fan Daomao looked at the dark sky and said loudly, Yes, it should have been a 5-day journey, but it just had to be delayed by a day. Counting with my fingers, we've been away from Jingbua City for more than 10 days. And the 30 days of the Silk Capsule's destruction are not far away. We can't delay any longer. Li Xiaowen nodded. Look, the silvery bright place ahead should be Yunxi Marsh, Sun Fian said as he pointed. Hearing this, Xiao Hua stopped the true qi circulating in his meridians and looked up. Sure enough, in the distance, there was a shiny place similar to a small mirror. Why does it look like Yunxi Marsh is similar to Jingbua City? Xiao Hua asked curiously. It's a coincidence that I've come, Li Xiaowen said with a smile. Jingbua City has countless lakes as its protective array. The entire lake looks like a bronze mirror. As for Yunxi Marsh, although it looks like countless lakes, that's because it's raining. When the rain stops, countless swamps of different sizes will be revealed. These swamps will be shrouded in white miasma from time to time. It's far from what we see now. Miasma? Xiao Hua immediately thought of the clouds and mist of the Yulian Mountains, and his face paled. Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't be afraid. Fan Daomao had already seen this coming. He smiled and said, The Yunxi Marsh is an insurmountable barrier for mortals, but for cultivators like us, it's a piece of cake. Even the most powerful water butterfly in the Yunxi Marsh is only a first-rank demon beast. Its strength is only comparable to a second-level refinement cultivator. It's extremely easy to deal with it. Sun Fian also said most of the swamps within several hundred miles of Yunqi Swamp are ordinary swamps. Only in the depths of the swamp are there water-pattern butterflies, so we don't have to be afraid. Seeing that Li Xiaowen and the others weren't afraid, Xiao Hua was naturally relieved. In the time it took to eat a meal, the four of them arrived at the edge of Yunqi Marsh. At this time, the pouring rain had stopped and the sun was shining brightly. If it weren't for the swamps in front of them, no one would have thought that it was still raining just a moment ago. In the swamp closest to them, the mirror-like pool of water gradually became lively. Countless water frogs, toads, water snakes, and other creatures began to swim in the water and began to hunt for food. There were also dragonflies and other creatures on the surface of the water. They either touched the water or flew to catch the tiny flying insects on the surface of the water or beside the water plants. There were also swallow-like birds that flew from afar and quickly slid down. They swooped down on the water, either holding a struggling small fish in their beaks or catching a young water snake in their claws. After the rain, the swamp instantly came alive. Fellow Taoist Li, this swamp is several hundred miles wide. Where should we go to open this silk bag? Xiao Hua looked at the swamp, full of vitality, and felt a trace of joy in his heart. Soon after, he came to a realization. This is difficult to do. Li Xiaowen nodded and said, this Yunqi Marsh is indeed safe and has no danger. However, the area is too large. I don't know where's the best place to open the silk bag. Let's go in and take a look. We'll go together. Just like in Yulian Mountain, we'll see who can open the silk bag. Sun Fian suggested. No one had any other ideas, so this was the only way. Thus, they flew up again, each holding a silk bag in their hands, and flew into Yunqi Marsh. Under everyone's feet was a swamp. It had just rained and was filled with water. At this moment, under the scorching sun, countless amounts of water vapor evaporated. Gradually, this swamp country became a land of mist. It was somewhat similar to Yulian Mountains. However, within this mist, there was a rather fishy stench that was nauseating. Xiao Hua and the others closed their mouths and noses before daring to move forward. After flying for an unknown period of time, no one's silk bag had any changes. Looking at the water vapor lingering in the air, Li Xiaowen frowned slightly. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Sun Fian exclaim in surprise. He pointed at the misty place in the distance and shouted, fellow Taoist Li, look, isn't that the Rainbow Epiphany? Rainbow Epiphany? Xiao Hua stared blankly. He had never heard of this name before. Following Sun Fian's finger, he saw that about a few hundred feet to their right, in the middle of the mist, there was a 3-foot-long rainbow suspended in the mist. It looked very blurry, but the rainbow color was different from the surrounding white mist. It was very eye-catching. However, if Sun Fian hadn't seen it, the others probably wouldn't have noticed it. This is the Rainbow Epiphany? What is this? Isn't it just a rainbow? It looks no different from a real rainbow. Xiao Hua was somewhat bewildered. However, he also knew that this definitely wasn't a real rainbow. The real thing was hanging in the sky. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen's face also revealed ecstasy. His voice was somewhat trembling. Hurry, if we can get this Rainbow Epiphany, even if we can't find a silk bag and fellow Taoist Qing and the others, this trip won't be in vain. While speaking, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian both urged their magic power. Without even calling out to Xiao Hua and Fan Daomao, they flew in the direction of the Rainbow Epiphany. Fan Daomao had obviously heard of the Rainbow Epiphyllum's reputation, but he was still half a beat slower than Li Xiaowen and the others, and his cultivation was also much lower. By the time he caught up, he was already more than 10 feet behind. Xiao Hua frowned and used his finger to scratch his chin. Then his eyebrows raised, and he very easily caught up to Fan Daomao. He asked in a low voice, fellow Taoist Fan, this Rainbow Epiphany, what is this thing? Fan Daomao looked at Xiao Hua very enviously. Then he looked at Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian in front of him. Knowing that he might not be able to catch up to them, he said, AI, I don't know how fellow Taoist cultivated before. You don't even know about this rainbow epiphany? Do I need to know? Xiao Hua's face was slightly cold. Cough, cough. Fan Daomao realized that his words were inappropriate. He coughed twice to cover it up. Fellow Taoist, Xiao must know about the Foundation Establishment Pill, right? Nonsense. I naturally know this. Xiao Hua rolled his eyes. Do you think I's an idiot? Of course not, fellow Taoist Xiao. Since you know about the Foundation Establishment Pill, you naturally know about the exquisite grass. And the exquisite grass is the main ingredient for refining the Foundation Establishment Pill. I naturally know this. Xiao Hua interrupted without hesitation. Fellow Taoist fan, just say it directly. Why are you beating around the bush for no reason? It's like this. The exquisite grass is the main ingredient for refining the Foundation Establishment Pill. And this rainbow epiphany is the main ingredient for refining the revolving illumination pill. Fellow Taoist, Xiao should know how precious this rainbow epiphany is. Fan Daomao laughed. I don't know, Xiao Hua said decisively. Xiao, fellow Taoist Xiao should not know about the revolving illumination pill, right? Fan Daomao was flabbergasted. Of course I don't know. I hope fellow Taoist fan can dispel my doubts. Xiao Hua's face was slightly red as he cupped his hands. And so it's like this. Fan Daomao rolled his eyes and said in a low voice, Time is tight. Fellow Taoist Xiao, I's flying speed is too slow. I'm afraid I can't catch up to fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun. Fellow Taoist Zhao's flying speed is much faster than ours. If we can catch up to fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun and obtain this rainbow epiphany, I will not only tell you about the revolving illumination pill, but also how to deal with this rainbow epiphany. As long as fellow Taoist Xiao gives 30% of the benefits to I, it's fine. I'm afraid it's not appropriate. Xiao Hua looked at Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian in the distance, somewhat hesitant. Sigh, fellow Taoist Xiao, with your fearful appearance, how can you survive in the cultivation world? Didn't you see that Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian didn't even say anything to us before rushing forward? Look again, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian. Aren't the two of them also quite a bit of distance apart? Aren't they also worried about each other? Fan Daomao stood in the air, almost stamping his feet. Besides, aren't we together looking for treasures? Besides the matter of the silk bag, we have to deal with it together. Normally, according to convention, it's whoever arrives first gets first. Xiao Hua's heart stirred. That's right, this rainbow epiphany was originally an ownerless item. Whoever had the ability could obtain it first. Right now, he was poor and had nothing. When he needed something, no matter what this rainbow epiphany was used for, as long as it was precious, he could exchange it for some cultivation method if he obtained it. Thinking this, Xiao Hua chuckled and said, Fellow Taoist fan, wait a moment. Let's talk about it after I get it. As he spoke, he activated the flying talisman. His flying speed suddenly increased by several times, rapidly flying forward. When Fan Daomao saw that Xiao Hua's speed was even faster than before, shock appeared in his eyes. Soon after, a pensive expression appeared on his face. Although Xiao Hua increased his speed, after all, he had delayed them for a long time. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were both afraid that Xiao Hua would catch up to them, so they had already used all their strength. By the time Xiao Hua had chased after them for more than half of the time, the two of them had already arrived in front of the rainbow epiphany. If you like this work, you're welcome to come a Chidian. Come to vote for it. Chapter 1375. However, when Li Xiaowen and the others had just flown to about 10 feet away from the rainbow epiphyllum, a fiery red brilliance soared into the sky. Urgently, a young cultivator about 10 years old, with a somewhat arrogant face, wearing a light green Taoist robe, holding a leaf-shaped yellow talisman in his hand, appeared from the brilliance, blocking in front of Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian with a vigilant look. Fellow Taoists, please don't go forward. This rainbow cloud is something that my blazing flame sect has long since taken a fancy to. If you get too close, I'm afraid there will be some misunderstanding. That cultivator looked to be only at the 4th level of chi refining, but his bearing was extraordinary. He didn't give off the feeling that he was being looked down upon because of his young age. Sun Fian and Li Xiaowen saw this and stopped in midair. Xiaohua also narrowed his eyes and slowed down. This, fellow Taoist, since this rainbow cloud, your sect has long since taken a fancy to it, but why don't you harvest it? Li Xiaowen reluctantly looked at the 7-colored brilliance not far away and asked curiously, "This fellow Taoist, I already said clearly that this rainbow cloud belongs to my blazing flame sect. As for when my sect will harvest it, I'm afraid you don't have to worry about it, right?" That cultivator coldly said, I don't dare. I only thought this rainbow cloud is a spirit herb. There must be a spirit creature protecting it. If fellow Taoist is unable to harvest it, we can also help when the time comes, Sun Fian said with a smile. Without waiting for Sun Fian to finish speaking, that cultivator decisively interrupted. There's no need to trouble fellow Taoists. I's 2 senior brothers have already. Before he finished speaking, that cultivator felt that he had misspoken and hurriedly shut his mouth. However, just this half of the sentence was enough for Sun Fian and Li Xiaowen. The two looked at each other and looked around. This corner of the swamp was currently filled with smoke and was a blur. They couldn't see anything clearly. The 2 senior brothers that the cultivator spoke of, they didn't know where they led the spirit beast guarding the spirit herb to. With such an excellent opportunity, how could Li Xiaowen and the others let it go? At this time, Fan Daomao also overtook Xiaohua and flew to the side of Li Xiaowen and the others. Quick, fellow Taoist Li Xiaowen, fellow Taoist Sun Fian, fellow Taoist Sun. I'll pluck the rainbow epiphyllum. You guys kill this little cultivator, and we'll divide the rainbow epiphyllum equally. Fan Daomao was very agile. His figure didn't stop in the slightest as he directly flew towards the rainbow cloud. As he flew past Li Xiaowen and the others, he didn't forget to call out their names. If it wasn't for the lack of time, wouldn't he have called out Xiaohua's name as well? When Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian heard this, they couldn't help but reveal anger in their eyes. They originally had the same idea as Fan Daomao, but they were still somewhat hesitant. After all, the Blazing Flame sect wasn't a small sect. If their hands and feet weren't clean, it would inevitably bring about trouble for them in the future. But now, Fan Daomao hadn't even called out his own name yet, and their names were already heard by this little cultivator. Leaving them, there was only one choice. What made them feel the most ashamed and angry was that they were originally in front. Even if they plucked the spiritual herb, the initiative was still in their hands. However, Fan Daomao was one step ahead of them. The situation had already changed, and they had no choice but to listen to Fan Daomao's arrangements. However, as matters stood, what other choice did they have? No, absolutely no. Therefore, even though Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were unhappy, they still slapped their storage pouches and each took out a yellow talisman, throwing it towards the young cultivator. Seeing the 2 4th-layer chi refining cultivators attacking together, the young cultivator's eyes revealed a hint of panic. He slapped his hand, and the leaf-shaped yellow talisman in his hand released a fiery red brilliance. It rushed down from the top of his head, forming a thin light screen in front of him. Just as the light screen formed, Li Xiaowen's icicle talisman and Sun Fian's hailstorm talisman shot over. The two knew the power of the Blazing Flame sect, so they used the water attribute yellow talisman, which was the opposite of the Blazing Flame sects. Kacha! Kacha! A series of sounds rang out. Li Xiaowen's low-grade icicle talisman flew over first. Like dozens of ice arrows, it hit the light screen. At the same time the icicles melted, tiny cracks also appeared on the thin light screen. Immediately after, Sun Fian's mid-grade hailstorm talisman attacked. The fist-sized spiritual energy was condensed into a circle, and with a poo-poo sound, it hit the cracked light screen. The enormous impact and the sharpness of the spiritual energy explosion directly tore the light screen apart. Even so, the young cultivator only had a trace of panic. His left hand slapped his storage pouch, and a crimson-yellow talisman was taken out. He urged his magic power, and a fiery red flying sword suddenly appeared. It paused in the air for a moment, and then stabbed towards Sun Fian. At this moment, Xiaohua had already arrived behind Li Xiaowen and the others. He was contemplating whether or not he should go forward. Sun Fian saw his hailstorm talisman succeed, and his opponent's fire sword talisman flew out. He couldn't help but be somewhat anxious. His eyes flashed, and he shouted loudly, "Xiaohua, fellow Taoist Xiao, why haven't you made your move yet?" Sun Fian's move was exactly the same as Fandao Mouse. He wanted to put Xiaohua in a situation where he had no choice but to make a move. But when Xiaohua heard this, his face relaxed instead. He crossed his arms in front of his chest, and on the contrary, looked on coldly from the sidelines. "You?" When Sun Fian saw this, he couldn't help but stare blankly. He really didn't think that his words would actually make Xiaohua make a decision. He actually didn't care anymore. Exactly. Xiaohua was originally in a bit of a dilemma. On one hand, he and Li Xiaowen and the others had gone through some life and death situations together. If he didn't help, he was afraid it wouldn't be right. But on the other hand, the Blazing Flame sect already had disciples picking here. Moreover, from what the young cultivators said, they already had 2 senior brothers who lured away the spirit beasts guarding the spirit herbs. They were only short of picking the rainbow epiphyllum. If he and the Blazing Flame sect saw it at the same time, even if he saw it a bit later, as long as he and the Blazing Flame sect were about the same time, Xiaohua absolutely wouldn't hesitate. He would definitely fly in front of the others. But now, if he made his move, wouldn't it be the same as Zhang Jihao's cutting of the path and the 100 Herbs sect's ugly conduct? What made Xiaohua most disgusted was that Sun Fian actually wanted to use despicable means to force him to make his move. If, before the Feng Clan's gathering, he probably wouldn't even pay attention to him, right? Now that he knew his methods, he wanted to tie him to them. How could he let him off so easily? Xiaohua didn't know what the revolving illumination pill was, but looking at the reactions of Li Xiaowen and the others, Xiaohua naturally knew the rarity of the rainbow epiphyllum. But if he was reduced to being in the same boat with such a repulsive person because of this spiritual object, Xiaohua really despised it. Thus, in an instant, Xiaohua made a decision. It was a decision that Sun Fian and Li Xiaowen couldn't understand. Seeing the flame sword stabbing towards them, the enchanting flames of the flying sword already burning in front of them, Sun Fian didn't have time to curse Xiaohua. He hurriedly retreated and grabbed with his hand, throwing out an icebound talisman, wanting to block the flame sword. That young cultivator was admittedly at the 4th level of Qi refining, but his cultivation was still a bit lower than Sun Fian and the others. The icebound talisman hit the flame sword's tip. With a ka sound, a 3-foot-thick block of ice was formed, sealing the flame sword inside, unable to be used again. On the other side, Li Xiaowen took the opportunity to throw out an icicle talisman, hitting the cultivator's waist. A burst of brilliance flashed, and the defensive yellow talisman on the cultivator's body was annihilated. An icicle pierced deeply into the cultivator's Taoist robe, and blood seeped out along the Taoist robe. That young cultivator's complexion instantly paled, but he still refused to retreat. He clenched his teeth and urged his magic power. His face suddenly turned dark red, and more blood flowed out from his waist. Urgently, the leaf-shaped yellow talisman in his hand once again emitted a brilliance that soared into the sky, then quickly fell in front of him. This time, it didn't form a light screen, but rather a large ball of fire, slowly rotating in front of the cultivator's eyes. Seeing that the young cultivator seemed to be stubbornly resisting, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian weren't moved in the slightest. Their eyes flashed with a trace of excitement, and they threw out the yellow talismans they had prepared long ago. That cultivator didn't hesitate. As soon as the ball of fire formed in front of him, he placed both hands on the leaf-shaped yellow talisman and pointed his hands. The ball of fire split into 2 with a hua sound. Following the cultivator's very difficult and heavy hand seals, It immediately turned into two raging flames, respectively rushing towards Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian. The flames were very fierce. The icicles, ice seals, and confinement talismans Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian threw out were all turned into ashes in the flames, not having the slightest effect. This is bad. Seeing this, Li Xiaowen was greatly alarmed. He hurriedly withdrew, wanting to attack from other places, but the flames were very fast. Just as Li Xiaowen chanted, the flames rushed in front of him. Sun Fian was similarly alarmed. If nothing unexpected happened, he would really become a cloud of smoke wherever the flames passed. However, at this critical moment, the flames suddenly stopped. They quietly surged in front of the two people for a moment, then immediately shrank back and disappeared. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian's faces were filled with pleasant surprise after surviving a calamity. They looked at the young cultivator from the Flames sect, whose face was flushed, his body bent, and the robe around his waist was completely soaked in blood. Was there any need to say more? He was already powerless to activate the leaf-shaped yellow talisman. The heavens are helping me. Sun Fian laughed loudly. He slapped his storage bag and took out several confinement talismans, hailstorm talismans, and so on. He activated his magic power and was about to kill that young cultivator on the spot. At this moment, from under the clouds, where the rainbow epiphyllum appeared in the swamp, Fan Daomao's heart-wrenching scream came. Shortly after, an angry roar came from below everyone. Where did this rascal come from? You actually dared to have ideas about my flame sect? Quickly hand over your life. This angry roar was truly shocking. It was as if a golden bell had rung in front of Xiao Hua and the others. How could Xiao Hua dare to hesitate? He didn't even see who had come. He activated his magic power, and his figure flew rapidly in the opposite direction. If you like this work, you're welcome to come Chidian. Chapter 1376. Admittedly, the 7 colors of the rainbow epiphyllum were only 100 feet away, but that angry shout seemed to be far more than 100 feet under the faint clouds. However, that cultivator's magic power followed that angry shout. As soon as Xiao Hua came into contact with it, he immediately knew that this so-called senior martial brother of the Blazing Flame School's 4th layer aura refining cultivator absolutely wasn't a 5th or 6th layer aura refining cultivator like he previously guessed, but a full 8th layer aura refining cultivator. Because of this, Xiao Hua didn't even think about it and promptly made a decision to flee in another direction. As for Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian, was there even a need to say anything? They simply sensed it earlier than Xiao Hua did. They separately fled in 2 different directions as if their lives depended on it. Just as Xiao Hua and Xue Fian flew away, a lean cultivator holding a fiery red jade pendant in his left hand flew out from under the clouds with a face full of anger. That cultivator swept his eyes over him and called out, "Xue Hong." Then, the fingers of his right hand moved. Just as he was about to form an incantation gesture, he caught sight of Xiao Hua's figure flying into the distance. He couldn't help but stare blankly. He inwardly said, could it be that he's a peak stage aura refining cultivator? But that can't be right. If he's at the peak stage of aura refining, wouldn't this rainbow epiphyllum be precisely what he wanted? Why would he leave? If he stayed, wouldn't we die without a burial ground? It was also during this moment of hesitation that Xiao Hua gradually disappeared. When he looked in 2 other directions, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian had also flown very far away. That cultivator flashed to the side, wanting to chase after them, but Xue Hong's face had already returned to its original deathly pale color. Traces of bright red remained on his face from the forceful use of magic power just now. Although he had already taken the opportunity to take a medicinal pill and no more blood flowed out from the wound on his waist, looking at his appearance, he was somewhat weak. Besides, that cultivator clenched his teeth and stomped his feet a few times in the air. He flew in front of Xue Hong and grabbed him, berating, "You're so fierce. Didn't you have a summoning talisman in your hand? Wouldn't we have known if you'd sent one? Why did you have to forcefully activate the fire spirit talisman? Why did you suffer such heavy injuries? With your cultivation, you can use it to defend yourself, but if you want to attack, you'll be lucky if you don't lose half of your life. Senior Apprentice Brother Lin, I'm useless. I can't cultivate in the sect, and I've already become a hindrance by following my senior apprentice brothers on this trip. If I send out a message talisman as soon as we meet an enemy, it'll be a disgrace to the name of our sect. But if it's a serious matter, won't it delay Senior Apprentice Brother from luring away the water pattern butterfly and harvesting the rainbow cloud? Shui Hong bit his lip and argued. You. Senior Marshal Brother Lin glared at Shui Hong with a look of exasperation. You're so stubborn. If you don't change your personality, you'll still be a low-level chi refining cultivator, even if you train for another 100 years. Little brother understands. Little brother will pay attention in the future. Although Shui Hong said so, he didn't look like someone who had admitted defeat for half a year. So I forget it. Senior Brother Lin pulled Shui Hong and flew down. After thinking for a moment, he stopped and pointed in the direction Li Xiaowen and the others had fled. These people, which sect are they from? This? I don't know. Shui Hong thought for a moment and said with a bit of confusion. These three people didn't wear the same Taoist robes, so I can't tell which sect they're from. However, I know their names. What? You know them? Senior Marshal Brother Lin stared blankly and asked in surprise. Not at all. Shui Hong told him what had happened just now. Senior Marshal Brother Lin was all smiles at first, then he blurted out, Is there even a need to say it? These people are all loose cultivators. Only these loose cultivators who don't belong to any sects would fight like dogs biting dogs, without any order to speak of. But when he heard Xiao Hua's strange actions, he was somewhat aghast. He pointed in the direction Xiao Hua had flown and said, But is he flying at the same speed as a peak chi refining cultivator? I didn't see how fast that person was flying, but he was flying in that direction. Shui Hong nodded and said, At that time, that cultivator was only watching from the side and didn't make a move. If he had made a move, let alone a peak chi refining cultivator, even a first or second layer chi refining cultivator would only need to throw an ice thorn talisman at me, and I'd be dead. That's a bit strange. Senior Marshal Brother Lin muttered, Xiao Hua. I've never heard of a peak chi refining loose cultivator called Xiao Hua. And even if he was a loose cultivator, how could a peak chi refining cultivator like him mingle with these filthy fourth layer chi refining cultivators? Li Xiaowen, Sun Fian, who are these people? They actually dared to attack a disciple of my Blazing Flame sect. When I return to the sect, I'll definitely report this to the sect master. We can't let this matter go. Senior Marshal Brother Lin said fiercely. Senior Marshal Brother Lin, did you get the rainbow cloud? Shui Hong nodded silently. Seeing that there was no longer any seven-colored brilliance in front of them, he knew that Senior Marshal Brother Lin had succeeded. That's right. Blazing Flame sects Lin Xiaonan, Yin Fei, and Shui Hong, the three great disciples, took action. How could the rainbow cloud have flown away? Lin Xiaonan said proudly. It's all thanks to the two of you, Senior Marshal Brothers. I was just helping out. Shui Hong said with a slightly red face. Of course not. If it weren't for you holding back those three loose cultivators, Junior Marshal Brother Yun and I would have rushed back. I'm afraid the others would have already succeeded. Lin Xiaonan sneered. That loose cultivator who flew down alone was only at the fourth layer of chi refining. He couldn't even block Junior Marshal Brother Yun's body-shattering bone incantation, and he actually dared to dream of taking the rainbow cloud away. Just as they were talking, another figure flashed out from the clouds. It was a middle-aged man with a medium build and a yellowish complexion. It was none other than Blazing Flame sect's other disciple, Yin Fei. Yin Fei held a storage pouch in one hand and a leaf-shaped yellow talisman in the other. He was smiling, but when he saw Shui Hong's injuries, he was shocked. He handed the storage pouch to Lin Xiaonan and asked, Senior Marshal Brother Lin, what happened to Junior Marshal Brother Shui? Lin Xiaonan took the storage pouch, opened it to take a look, and explained the situation. This foolish brother thinks these people are loose cultivators. That cultivator called Xiaohua is someone we can't afford to offend. We'd better go back and ask the sect to make a decision. Shuehong opened his mouth, wanting to say, "That's Xiaohua. His cultivation level seems to be only at the second layer of qi refining." But then he thought about the urgency of the situation and was afraid he might have been mistaken, so he didn't say anything. That's the only way." Yun Fei nodded. He looked at Shuehong and said, "Junior Marshal Brother Shui, you've done a great service this time. When we return to the sect, I'm afraid you'll be handsomely rewarded. I hope Junior Marshal Brother Shui can seize this opportunity." "It's all thanks to you two senior marshal brothers," Shuehong hurriedly said, clasping his hands. "I understand. Haha, it's all thanks to you." Yin Fei laughed. "Looking at your injuries, you didn't tarnish the reputation of our Blazing Flame sect. The headmaster is very happy to hear that." Immediately, the three of them flew straight to the west. As for Xiaohua, he was as anxious as a bird startled by the twang of a bow. He was very clear in his heart that he didn't attack, but how could an expert at the 8th layer of qi refining allow him to say anything? Maybe he'd use some trick he didn't understand, and he'd lose his life on the spot. Wouldn't that be an injustice? After flying for a while, Xiaohua saw that the cultivator didn't chase after him. He slowed down and slowly flew forward. In his heart, he unexpectedly felt a faint disappointment. It was as if he really hoped that the cultivator would chase after him, so he could try and kill an 8th layer cultivator on the spot. Hey, what am I thinking? He's at the 8th layer of qi refining. His cultivation level is higher than mine by more than a level. I can't be careless. If I get cocky just because I was able to kill 2 6th layer cultivators, I'll die at the hands of others sooner or later. Xiaohua secretly warned himself. I don't know how Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian are doing. That cultivator didn't chase after me, so I'm afraid he'll chase after those two. Those two's flying speed is average. I'm afraid they won't be able to escape. Xiaohua was somewhat disheartened. He wanted to take out a sound-transmitting talisman and try, but when he thought about the two's behavior just now, he really didn't want to be reduced to jackalls of the same lair as them. Heaven's forsaken, it's just like that. It's just a plate of loose sand, only using a cultivation method to gather loose cultivators together. Without this, just the grudges between loose cultivators within Heaven's Forsaken would be enough to destroy Heaven's Forsaken. If this problem isn't solved, Heaven's Forsaken will forever be nothing. Xiaohua saw that the mist in this cloud-light marsh was faintly discernible. Apart from the faint stench, it really did look like a fairyland. He unconsciously flew slowly and carefully pondered. Perhaps Senior Qing is using this method to eliminate the dregs of Heaven's Forsaken? What's the use of the revolving illumination pill in the end? Fan Daomao didn't explain it clearly, and I've never heard of it in Jingbua City's marketplace. Presumably, it's not an ordinary medicinal pill. Moreover, seeing that Blazing Flame Sect's disciple would rather die to protect it, I'm afraid that this revolving illumination pill is extremely important. It's comparable to the building foundation pill. I'm afraid it's also something that can increase cultivation. No, that's not right. Fan Daomao said that it's related to divine sense. It's for people at the peak of the aura refining realm. Xiaohua was frowning as he thought, when his heart suddenly tightened. He vigilantly looked to his left. That side was also filled with mist, and there was also a faint shadow flying to the side. Xiaohua was greatly alarmed. He thought that it was Blazing Flame Sect's Lin Xiaonan chasing after him. Without thinking, he held his breath, found a place with dense mist, and plunged in. Fortunately, when he landed, he could clearly see that this was an extremely hidden area. There was an enormous boulder lying horizontally in the middle of the marsh, and Xiaohua was right on the side of that boulder. However, when Xiaohua landed on the ground, the toads that were previously squatting on the boulder were all scared away. They croaked and jumped into the swamp. This is bad. As soon as he heard this voice, Xiaohua knew that there was a problem. By the time he wanted to run, it was already too late. He heard someone shout from above him. Who is it? Immediately, a bright light shined from above his head. Bright light technique. Xiao Hua knew from the Feng clan's book of basic spells that this was a spell used for illumination. What should I do? Although this voice was different from Lin Xiaonan's, Xiao Hua couldn't see the other side's appearance. He didn't know the other side's cultivation, so he was still somewhat nervous. Oh, that's right. How could I forget this? At this critical moment, Xiao Hua suddenly remembered. Chapter 1377. As Xiao Hua thought this, he brushed his hand and took out a yellow talisman from his space. This yellow talisman appeared very exquisite, and the runes on the talisman paper floated above it. They vaguely seemed to be alive, slowly flowing. It was the Earth Escape talisman that Xiao Hua had purchased from the market. Xiao Hua urged his magic power, and the runes on the talisman suddenly expanded, releasing an extremely faint yellow splendor that covered Xiao Hua's entire body. Before the cultivator's illumination technique could illuminate him, the entire brilliance gradually sank into the huge rock. In the instant the Earth Escape talisman entered the huge rock, Xiao Hua was dumbfounded. Xiao Hua wasn't stunned by the Earth Escape talisman's function, nor was it because he saw the cultivator above him. Rather, in the instant he entered the huge rock, a kind of incomparable familiarity spread from his skin. A kind of warm and very safe feeling enveloped his entire body. It was as if this brilliance that entered the huge rock was his home, a place that he had visited countless times before. What the hell is going on? Xiao Hua felt this indescribable familiarity and was truly at a loss. So much so that his 10 fingers were pinched in front of his chest, each forming a kind of spell seal. The spell seals were very familiar and also very profound, but there wasn't any magic power being generated from the spell seals. Xiao Hua had a kind of intuition that this magic power didn't seem to be something that his current cultivation could mobilize. Moreover, in his meridians, when the true qi circulated, the magic power that was generated simply followed the spell seals, somewhat inharmonious. But as for what was inappropriate, Xiao Hua was at a loss. Thinking of his own unique understanding of the spell seals, Xiao Hua somewhat understood. Could it be that I knew this Earth Escape technique back then? However, he soon faintly shook his head. The 5 elements escape technique was something that foundation establishment cultivators could use. It was far from something that he, a mere second-level qi condensation cultivator, could vainly dream of. If he was a foundation establishment cultivator back then where did his original cultivation go? His meridians were something that he had never cultivated before. If I was a foundation establishment cultivator, how could I have fallen to Yellow Flower Ridge? Xiao Hua's hands unconsciously formed hand seals, as if he was extremely familiar with them. He allowed the familiar feeling to ripple through his entire body. Suddenly, Xiao Hua seemed to have been hit by a confinement talisman again. He stood there in a daze. His mouth was wide open, and his eyes were somewhat blank. It seemed he had thought of something outside the boulder. As soon as Xiao Hua entered, a bright light illuminated the place where Xiao Hua was standing. Afterwards, a short old man in extremely tattered clothes with gray-white hair and a face full of wrinkles flew over from the sky. His cultivation seemed to be around the 6th layer of qi refining. The old man's face was full of vigilance. While holding a few yellow talismans, he looked around and shouted from time to time, "This old man sees you. Come out quickly. Why are you hiding? Aren't you there? Still not coming out? Must you force me to get angry?" However, even after talking for a long time and landing on the boulder, there was still no response. Is there really no one? The old man muttered to himself very strangely. At this moment, a slender water snake drilled out from the mud of the swamp and swam in the mud. The toads and frogs in the surroundings that had just returned to normal immediately cried out loudly. They each jumped into the water and swam away. Oh, so it's like that. The old man saw clearly and nodded slightly. The expression on his face relaxed a little. He muttered to himself, "Like I said, A place like Yunshi Marsh stinks to death. Who would come here after the rain? He has also grown up. His thoughts are starting to become more meticulous. He actually chose this place. Soon after, the old man sat cross-legged on the boulder and closed his eyes to adjust his breathing. He no longer paid attention to the situation around him. Inside the boulder, Xiaohua was like a clay sculpture. After a long time, he blinked a few times and muttered, "How is this possible? I'm definitely wrong. How could I have cultivated other meridians? But, Sect Master said that my meridians seem to be alive. Inside them, there must be many meridians that the second layer of qi refining doesn't touch. Who knows if those meridians have been cultivated or not? Besides, the strange spell just now clearly said that the true qi in these meridians can't support it. If it wasn't for the fact that these spells don't use magic power, then there's only one explanation. This young master still has some meridians that can't be cultivated before the second layer of qi refining. No, before the middle stage of foundation establishment. Celestial clan, the body of a sage? This thought suddenly emerged in Xiao Hua's mind. I am really from the Celestial clan? Xiao Hua thought in his mind. The spells in his hands were still unceasingly forming. These spells were very complicated. Compared to the Phone clan's basic spells, or the spells of imprisonment talismans, they were of a much higher level. However, these seemingly very profound spells were displayed in Xiao Hua's hands without any sluggishness. Outside the boulder, the time it took to eat a meal quickly passed. The old man suddenly opened his eyes and looked to the east. However, the east was shrouded in clouds and mist, so he couldn't see very far. The time should be here. That child has come, right? The old man stood up from the boulder and slapped his storage pouch to take out a yellow talisman. He used magic power to slightly activate it. A beautiful fireball flew into the air, spun a few times, and exploded with a bang, dispersing a large area of the surrounding clouds and mist. Soon after, a young cultivator with a medium build flew out from the clouds and mist. As he flew, he vigilantly looked all around. This young cultivator's appearance was extremely fair. His age was about the same as Xiao Hua's, and he looked to be about 17 or 18 years old. He wasn't a bystander. He was the same person Xiao Hua met at Jinghua City's E.G. When the old man saw he flying over, a gratified smile appeared on his face. He flew in the air and called out, "Uncle Xiang." When he saw the old man, he quickly flew over with a smile on his face. This smile was completely different from the one he had at E.G. This smile was filled with sincerity and attachment. When the two landed on the boulder, he bowed and said, "This little one isn't talented. I haven't seen Uncle Xiang in many years. This little one greets Uncle Xiang." When the old man saw this, his face was filled with gratification and panic. He quickly helped he up and said, "Young master, aren't you trying to kill this old servant by kowtowing like this? If the old master sees this, he will scold this old servant." Uncle Xiang, he forced himself to kowtow. The old man couldn't stop him and could only let him kowtow while the old man moved to the side. "Young master." The old man waited for Gong he to finish kowtowing before helping him up. Before he could say anything, Gong he said, "Uncle Xiang, my Fu family has long been destroyed. There is no young master here. Uncle Xiang, just call me he." "Oh, these past few years, this old servant didn't dare to visit you in order to avoid being seen by others. I wonder if you have been well?" The old man's eyes stared straight into he's eyes. His own eyes were already filled with tears. It was unknown whether it was joy or sadness. "Uncle Xiang, I'll let you know. Ever since I left Uncle Xiang, I went to visit the Cho family. Sigh, the Cho family's business is flourishing. It feels like the sun in the sky. I didn't see any opportunities, so I left first. I cultivated while doing some trading at the Jinghua City's exchange market. Looking at your cultivation, I'm sure you've suffered a lot these past few years. If the old master in heaven knew about this, he would be at ease." The old man sighed and said, "But the Cho family's power is too great. It's not something you can fight against alone. If you can't, you'd better cultivate harder and think about revenge in the future. Uncle Xiang, this little one, is unwilling. He said hatefully, my Fu family was famous for making talismans in the country of Shi. What kind of talisman can't we make? Even if it was just a few spirit talismans, wouldn't be a problem. However, our entire foundation was snatched away just like that. The 14 direct descendants of our Fu clan, other than this kid, have all been eliminated. Do you think this kid can wait until the future? Luckily, Uncle Xiang took me away that year and brought along some of my father's unimportant cultivation methods and refining methods. Otherwise, even if I wanted to take revenge, I'm afraid I wouldn't be able to do so. So, while I was cultivating, I thought that it's impossible to rely on myself outside. If I want to take revenge earlier, I have to enter the Cho family circle and start from the inside, destroy it bit by bit. In the worst case, I can kill the Cho family. Don't, young master. The old man was anxious. This is a dangerous matter. Let me think about it. Yes, Uncle Xiang. I asked Uncle Xiang to come out because I want to have a good talk with Uncle Xiang. I want Uncle Xiang to give me an idea. On the huge rock, Xiao Hua and the old man looked at each other and talked. Inside the huge rock, Xiao Hua had another change. His mind was not distracted. His hands were fluently casting the spell. After thinking for a long time, he suddenly felt his whole body gradually moving up. Oh no, this is bad. Xiao Hua suddenly realized that this so-called Earth Escape Talisman had a time limit. He had stayed in this huge rock for a long time. He was afraid that the talisman had started to lose its effect. Xiao Hua clapped his hands and was about to cast another Earth Escape Talisman. But just as he picked up the talisman, he frowned slightly. He had been inside the huge rock all this time. He didn't know if the person on the huge rock had left. If he didn't leave, wouldn't the light from casting the Earth Escape Talisman attract his attention? After thinking for a while, Xiao Hua still put the talisman into his space. Then he twisted his body with all his might and turned to the other side of the huge rock. When Xiao Hua reached the other side of the huge rock, his body was completely squeezed out by the huge rock. Fortunately, Xiao Hua's figure flashed on top of the boulder without making any sound. The thick white fog completely covered his figure as he lay on the boulder. This person's voice is so familiar. Xiao Hua very naturally heard the old man's words. Uncle Xiang, please pay more attention and see if there are any movements from the Cho family. If there are any opportunities, please inform me. I will wait for an opportunity to sneak in. Even if I can't kill the Cho family with my own hands, taking out my Fu family's ancestral talisman is also a good thing. Chapter 1378. Match. Xiao Hua stared blankly for a moment before immediately distinguishing between the two. He wondered inwardly. When I was in East City, I couldn't find him anywhere. So he ran here. Haha. Didn't this guy say he has a master? How come he has an enemy now? Does he want to sneak into the enemy's sect? When Xiao Hua's Earth Escape Talisman lost its effect and was forced out, Uncle Xiang had already talked for a long time. He only heard the end of the conversation, but Uncle Xiang replied, What? Young master wants to sneak into the enemy's sect? How can this be? Young master's cultivation level. Uncle Xiang asked in surprise, How? Young master's cultivation level. How can it change? Haha, Uncle Xiang, I'm untalented, but I coincidentally obtained a cultivation technique in Jingwa City. It can conceal one's cultivation level. Although I can't comprehend 50% of this cultivation technique with my aptitude, I can change my cultivation level to the first layer of the aura refining realm, or even the second layer and so on. I can definitely fool the enemy's attention. Oh, so it's like that. Uncle Xiang nodded, gratified. That's good. Otherwise, with young master's current cultivation level, how could he sneak in? Then, Uncle Xiang changed the topic. Young master, revenge is important, but young master also has to consider master's descendants. In fact, in this old servant's opinion, this is the most important thing. Oh, right, these past few years, this old servant has been thinking about young master's dual cultivation. This old servant thinks, if it's possible, young master might as well Xiaohua was eavesdropping in the distance. He couldn't see Uncle Xiang's expression, but in the white fog, Uncle Xiang's expression was exceptionally wonderful. It was a kind of annoyed but didn't dare to disobey, but if he did, he would feel extremely uncomfortable. Uncle Xiang had just nagged for a while, when Uncle Xiang nervously looked around and whispered, "Uncle Xiang, although this place is hidden, there are many cultivators picking spiritual herbs after the rain. This kid has a blood feud and wants to hide my identity to seek revenge." Uncle Xiang used to be a famous figure in the cultivation world of our country of Xi. If someone saw this kid with Uncle Xiang, I'm afraid it would be inappropriate. Uncle Xiang was happy to hear this. He nodded and said, "That year, before this old servant joined the Fu family, I also killed several. Alas, why bring that up? By the way, there's a female cultivator on Qingyi Mountain. Listen, Uncle Xiang, is there someone behind the boulder?" Song Ying suddenly pointed at Xiaohua's location. "Oh no, how did this guy discover me?" Xiaohua broke out in a cold sweat. He patted his storage pouch and took out several yellow talismans. He wanted to stand up. Unexpectedly, Uncle Xiang was shocked at first. He turned his head and scolded, "Where did this little thief come from?" But then he shouted again, young master, you, why are you flying so fast? This old monk has yet to tell you the details of the female cultivators." As he spoke, Uncle Xiang's voice became softer and softer. He must have flown off to catch up with them. After a long while, Xiaohua walked out from behind the boulder with a strange expression on his face. He stood there, not knowing whether to laugh or cry as he looked in the direction the two people flew off in. It was unknown what he was thinking. Then Xiaohua stamped his feet, looked at the surrounding boulders, and sent out another earth escape talisman. His whole body went in and out of the boulder several times. Only after he had satisfied his craving for earth escape did he finally fly up. However, while Xiaohua was flying in the air, he forgot his plan. He inwardly said, "Song Ying admittedly has a blood feud, but he always has a target for revenge and a cultivation technique to cultivate. But what about me? Hunter Herb's Gate is such a big power. If one doesn't have a cultivation base in the late stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, or even at the Golden Core realm, it's basically impossible for me to take revenge. But what about my cultivation technique? Alas, there's no reason for this. I'd better see if Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian are dead or alive." Xiaohua finally understood. "I have my own principles. My goal is the same as theirs. As for other things, I can't wallow in a mire with them." Thinking about this, Xiaohua opened his storage pouch and prepared to take out the consecutive note talisman. However, just as he opened his storage pouch, a light blue brilliance flashed in his storage pouch. "Huh?" Xiaohua almost cried out in surprise. However, he immediately understood. He reached out his hand and took out a silk pouch from his storage pouch. The moment the silk pouch was exposed, it immediately spun rapidly like a fist-sized spinning top. As the spinning ball of light spun, countless amounts of spiritual energy were used. Moreover, specks of light floated out from the ball of light. After the time it took to brew a cup of tea, the ball of light gradually stopped spinning. Then, Qing Fengmin's voice sounded, "Fellow Taoists, it's been hard on you. I hope you can continue to work hard. The next place is Fire Fusion Valley." Fire Fusion Valley? When Xiaohua heard this, he frowned again. The doubt in his heart, or rather, he was even more puzzled. Southern Rainbow Plain, Yulian Mountain, Cloud Shi Marsh, and Fire Fusion Valley. Each of them was a dangerous place. Moreover, the spiritual energy in each place was different. This silk, could it be that it was tailored according to the spiritual energy in each place? Forget it. Since I have to lower myself to ask for a cultivation technique, I can only listen to his arrangements. Xiaohua casually placed the silk pouch that had lost its brilliance into his storage pouch. He took out the consecutive note talisman and thought to himself, I hope the two of them are still alive to hear this news. However, just as Xiaohua was about to release the consecutive note talisman, he suddenly saw a strange brilliance under his feet. That brilliance was very dazzling. It was very special in the light white fog. Seeing this brilliance, Xiao Hua was overjoyed. He put away the consecutive note talisman and took out several yellow talismans. He slowly flew towards the brilliance. As he flew closer, Xiao Hua could clearly see that at the bottom of the fog, in the viscous swamp, there was a faint seven-colored ring floating in the air. Below the ring was a spherical object about the size of a duck's egg. Its surface was bumpy and bumpy. At the bottom of the sphere was a palm-sized black leaf growing in the swamp. The rainbow cloud? Xiao Hua had never seen this thing before. This seven-colored ring was much smaller than the one he had seen before. Its luster was also much dimmer. Therefore, he couldn't be sure that this was the rainbow cloud. Most importantly, Xiao Hua had always thought of the rainbow cloud as a gorgeous flower. However, when he saw this ugly spherical object, it was far from what he had imagined. Xiao Hua stopped about 3 meters away from the rainbow epiphyllum and carefully observed it from both sides. The 2/8 layer Qi refining senior brothers of the Fire Flame School had gone to look after the spirit object. Presumably, the spirit object's strength wouldn't be too weak. After looking for a moment, Xiao Hua didn't discover anything. He couldn't help but feel bewildered. Scratching his head, Xiao Hua hesitated. Should he pick it or not? After standing there for the time it took to make a cup of tea, Xiao Hua still couldn't resist this great temptation. He first placed some yellow talismans on his body. Then, he lowered himself and prepared to pick it. However, just as Xiao Hua was about to release a spell, he suddenly felt as if he was being watched. Xiao Hua immediately stopped his hand. Then, he did his utmost to look all around. Under his extremely careful observation, Xiao Hua followed the direction of his senses and found a clue. That anomaly actually came from a leaf below the rainbow cloud. The leaf was black. Although it was the same as an ordinary leaf, it was still a little thinner. At the edge of the leaf, there were actually 2 thin antennae. On top of the antennae, there were also 2 small balls. What made Xiao Hua vigilant were these 2 balls. Xiao Hua was able to discern it clearly. He couldn't help but sweat a bit on his forehead. This spiritual object, its disguise is really ingenious. If anyone couldn't see through the rainbow epiphyllum's technique, they would definitely be attacked by it if they weren't careful. What kind of spiritual object is this? Xiao Hua hurriedly flew back a bit. His eyes were fixed on the spiritual object as he tried to guess. Unfortunately, with his limited experience as a cultivator, how could he possibly know? How should I deal with this thing? Xiao Hua pinched his chin and frowned in thought. This time it was very quick. In just a few flicks of his fingers, Xiao Hua took out a confinement talisman. Urging his magic power, he released it towards the spiritual object. That spiritual object was very sharp. When the confinement talisman was still a few feet away, the leaf-like object suddenly withdrew. Soon after, it suddenly spread out. A butterfly separated from the rainbow cloud's leaf stem. Those 2 pitch-black wings were each the size of a palm. There were some water ripples on them. Moreover, those water ripples seemed to have the shape of some talismans. As the wings flapped, spiritual energy overflowed everywhere. The water-patterned butterfly flapped its pitch-black wings. As the talismans on the wings flashed, the weak spiritual energy around the wings was stirred up. After this spiritual energy was formed, it actually had a kind of suction force, sucking in the surrounding spiritual energy. In the blink of an eye, it formed a pillar. Once the pillar of spiritual energy was formed, it spun and flew toward Xiao Hua. This is a water-patterned butterfly. Seeing the rod formed by spiritual energy attack, Xiao Hua was somewhat dumbstruck. He knew that there were water-patterned butterflies in Yinxi Marsh. Moreover, after seeing it, he also understood that this was a water-patterned butterfly. However, he never expected that the water-patterned butterfly's attack method was actually this kind of spiritual energy rod. Just as he was somewhat hesitating, the spiritual energy rod had already flown before his eyes. In this short moment, the spiritual energy rod became even thicker. The momentum of its flight was directly like a 2nd or 3rd layer Qi refining cultivator, urging his magic power to attack with all his strength. Xiao Hua felt the stirring cold wind and hurriedly urged the flight talisman. His figure flew up gracefully, and with a turn, He leapt into the air. The spiritual energy rod missed and smashed into a huge rock. The spiritual energy rod's strength was limited, but the force of its attack was quite large. With a zung-zung sound, it actually carved a deep groove into the huge rock. Is there a mistake? Xiao Hua's gaze swept over, and he became even more shocked. If the force of its flight brushed against a cultivator's body, no matter how sturdy their defenses were, they would probably be broken. Immediately afterward, the water-patterned butterfly flapped its wings and chased after him again. Looking at its flying speed, it was almost as fast as a 5th or 6th layer qi refining cultivator. Chapter 1379. Xiao Hua saw the water-patterned butterfly flapping its wings and chasing after him. Its speed was actually comparable to a 6th-stage qi refining cultivator. The corner of his mouth unconsciously revealed a trace of smile. He flew sideways into the sky, controlling his speed to a certain degree. He was just able to fly faster than the water-patterned butterfly, but not by much. Little by little, he lured the water-patterned butterfly into the swamp next to the huge rock. The water-patterned butterfly, seeing that it couldn't catch up, unconsciously flapped its wings repeatedly. The brilliance of the talisman scripts on its wings flapped, and one after another, spinning spirit chi rods flew out one after another. Not only did they smash into the mountain rocks, but they also stirred up the mist in the swamp. This was different from the strong winds that Xiaohua usually saw. Not only did these rod-shaped spirit chi rods not disperse the mist, but because of the mist, Xiaohua's vision became even worse. After the last spirit chi rod was released, the talisman scripts on the water-patterned butterfly's body became somewhat dim. It seemed that its vitality had been damaged, and it didn't have the strength to release any more spirit chi rods. Moreover, the water-patterned butterfly flapped its wings and actually wanted to turn around and return. Xiaohua was very surprised. Isn't this water-patterned butterfly a bit too intelligent? It wasn't easy for him to lure the water-patterned butterfly away. How could he let it turn around? Immediately, Xiaohua didn't hold back. He flipped his wrist, and several fireball talismans that he had long since stored up power shot out. They surrounded the water-patterned butterfly and began to explode with a rumbling sound. At the same time, Xiaohua didn't hesitate. He urged his magic power and flew with all his strength to the place where the rainbow cloud was. When he got close, he immediately used a spell and extracted the entire rainbow cloud from the swamp. With a wave of his hand, he sent it into the space behind his head. Soon after, Xiaohua controlled the puppet inside the space and began to slowly dig a hole in a corner of the space, preparing to plant the rainbow cloud inside. Just as Xiaohua sent the rainbow cloud into the space, the water-patterned butterfly escaped from several exploding fireballs in an extremely sorry state. Its pitch-black wings had a faint flame, aura, and some black smoke. There were even some cracks on its wings. However, at the same time that the rainbow cloud disappeared, the water-patterned butterfly seemed to feel something. Its originally somewhat trembling wings suddenly flapped, and the water-patterned butterfly chased after Xiaohua with extreme speed. Xiaohua naturally paid close attention to the movements of the water-patterned butterfly. When he saw the water-patterned butterfly fly out of the group of fireballs and even fly faster than before, he immediately laughed and said, "You should obediently stay in Yunqi Marsh. This young master won't play with you anymore." Then he flew high into the sky and flew into the distance. What shocked Xiaohua was that the water-patterned butterfly was even crazier than before. It flapped its wings and did its utmost to strike out the spirit chi staff while chasing relentlessly. Fortunately, Xiaohua flew much faster than the water-patterned butterfly. After a few twists and turns, he made several detours and got rid of the water-patterned butterfly. After flying far away, Xiaohua very strangely looked at the clouds and mist behind him that were stirred up by countless spirit chi staffs of various sizes and muttered to himself, "Isn't it just picking the rainbow cloud? You didn't plant it. So why are you chasing this young master like it's something that belongs to your family?" After that, Xiaohua took some time to wait for the puppet to finish digging a big hole. He then took some water and mud from the swamp and placed the rainbow epiphyllum inside. It seemed like Xiao Hua wanted to try out how to plant the rainbow epiphyllum. However, what Xiao Hua didn't expect was that at the stem of the rainbow cloud, there were 2 rice grain-sized eggs stuck to it. When Xiao Hua put the rainbow cloud into the space, they also came in. After planting the rainbow cloud, Xiao Hua flew for a while before taking out the consecutive notes talisman. He urged it with his magic power, and the consecutive notes talisman actually whistled and flew in a direction. Hee. I don't know which fellow Taoist is still alive. It's most likely Li Xiaowen. Xiao Hua thought and sped up to chase. The consecutive notes talisman flew out of Yunxi Marsh. When Xiao Hua flew to a slightly deviated cliff, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian hurriedly greeted him. Sun Fian smiled and said, I already said that fellow Taoist Zhao's magic power is profound and his flying speed is fast. How could he be captured by the disciples of the Fire Flame sect? If fellow Taoist Li made a bet with I, wouldn't the result immediately be clear? Xiao Hua originally wanted to face Sun Fian's condemnation, but when he saw Sun Fian's attitude, he was stunned at first. Then, he cupped his hands and said, fellow Taoist Sun is too kind. How can I's cultivation be compared to the 2 seniors? The difference is too great. Li Xiaowen also had a harmonious expression, as if the scene in Yunxi Marsh had never happened. He smiled and said, fellow Taoist Xiao is too modest. When we were in the 2nd layer of the Qi refining realm, how could we have fellow Taoist Zhao's magical power? I'm afraid that when fellow Taoist Xiao cultivates to the 4th layer of the Qi refining realm, we won't be fellow Taoist Zhao's opponent. Hearing this, Sun Fian's expression changed slightly, but it was immediately covered by a smile. Xiao Hua saw that the 2 people didn't mention a word about what happened before, and he understood in his heart. His eyes turned, and he said with a smile, I just practiced a rare kind of cultivation method, which is why I can fly slightly faster. But if this is known by others, I won't have any advantage to speak of. It's not as good as the 2 fellow Taoists who have profound magic power, so I'm not afraid of being known by others. When Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian heard this, they both had a look of understanding and nodded. This is fellow Taoist Zhao's unique magical power. The 2 of us can guarantee that if fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't reveal it, others definitely won't know. Xiao Hua cupped his hands. Many thanks for the 2 fellow Taoists' magnanimity. Li Xiaowen glanced at Sun Fian, then turned to Xiao Hua and said, fellow Taoist Xiao, our silk bags haven't changed. I wonder if fellow Taoist Xiao, the silk bag I obtained from Yongshang has changed. Xiao Hua said as he took out the silk bag that had already turned into an ordinary one. Haha, that's great. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian both clapped and laughed, asking, where is the next place? Fire Thaw Valley. Xiao Hua said without hesitation. Fire Thaw Valley? When Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian heard this, they didn't frown or be shocked like Xiao Hua thought. They just understood like before. Could it be the 2 fellow Taoists already know? Xiao Hua asked curiously. To be honest with fellow Taoist Xiao, just now, when we fled here first, we already discussed it. Li Xiaowen said with a smile. I and Sun Fian received fellow Taoist Zhao's reminder. Thinking about Nan Kaiping, Yulian Shan, and Yunxi Lake, according to their characteristics, we felt that this Fire Thaw Valley was also within fellow Taoist Zhao's arrangements. Oh, Xiao Hua understood. So, if fellow Taoist Xiao can't come out in time, the 2 of us might have to go to Fire Thaw Valley to try our luck after waiting for a day. Sun Fian said, of course, this is only a backup plan. Since fellow Taoist Xiao has come out, the 3 of us have already gathered, and the remaining 3 silk bags are all intact. Naturally, this is the best. Are we going to Fire Thaw Valley now? Xiao Hua nodded and asked. Li Xiaowen shook his head. We can't go today. We offended the Fire Flame sect, and we don't know if they have an ambush outside. Yunxi Lake is admittedly big, but if they want to, I'm afraid they'll look for us outside. Why don't we create a diversion and rest here for a day? It won't be too late to go out after they've chased us far away. Hearing this, Xiaohua nodded repeatedly. This was the trick he used to trick the 100 Herbs sect when he came out of Yellow Flower Ridge. There are hidden caves in this mountain. Let's go in first. We'll leave tomorrow morning. Sun Fian flew first, and each of them found a cave at the foot of the mountain to adjust their breathing and rest. Xiaohua sat alone in the cave, thinking about Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian's attitude just now. He couldn't help but sneer. He was very clear that it was because he revealed some divine abilities that surpassed ordinary cultivators that made the two of them treat him as an equal. Moreover, because of the common goal of treasure hunting, the three of them were temporarily in a kind of balance. No one could say for sure what would happen after the treasure hunt. As for whether Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian would suddenly attack him and take away the silk bags, Xiaohua wasn't too worried. After all, he was good at flying. If the two of them didn't have full confidence, they definitely wouldn't attack him. Besides, the two of them were still suspicious of each other. Who would take the risk to offend a cultivator who could fly faster than them? As for whether or not the two of them would leak out the fact that he could fly faster, Xiaohua was even less afraid. Wait until this young master's cultivation catches up to yours. Would I still be afraid of you talking nonsense? As Xiaohua thought, he took another marrow cleansing pill and calmly refined the medicinal efficacy. Moreover, he immersed his mind into space, comprehending the Tao of heaven and delving into the towering realm. In the next few days, the three of them seemed to have the help of God, and their progress was very smooth. In the Fire Melt Valley, beside a large expanse of boiling magma, Sun Fian's silk bag was opened by the rich and hot fire spiritual energy, and they found the next location, Hurricane Canyon. The three of them hurriedly rushed to Hurricane Canyon, braving the hurricane that could easily blow away the protective yellow talismans. Under the circumstances of the three people's confinement talismans, Vajra talismans, and other protective yellow talismans, they finally opened Li Xiaowen's silk bag inside the hurricane. The hurricane that could disperse the yellow talismans actually couldn't take away the weightless silk bag, and Xing Fengmin's voice also didn't disperse inside the hurricane. Fellow Taoists, congratulations, congratulations. The next test is the last one. I'm sure that fellow Taoists already have some complaints in their hearts. However, I still have to tell fellow Taoists that this time there is indeed a complete set of cultivation methods, and there are also magic tools, medicinal pills, and so on. However, I, Tianqi, have a lot of fellow Taoists, and I also want to give this opportunity to everyone fairly, so I have no choice but to set this test. I hope that fellow Taoists who can reach the end can understand my painstaking efforts. This Qing Fengmin's words were long-winded, causing the three of them to only curse in their hearts. While bitterly holding on to the yellow talismans that were about to be blown away by the hurricane, they pricked up their ears to listen. When Qing Fengmin said the three words Thunderclap Cave, the three of them no longer paid any attention to the silk bag, and all of them hurriedly flew out of Hurricane Canyon. However, after leaving Hurricane Canyon and arriving at a safe place, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian's complexions didn't look good. Chapter 1380. When Xiaohua saw their unsightly expressions, he immediately knew that the Thunder Accumulation Cave was definitely not a good place to live. While the three of them were discussing under a tree in the dense forest, Xiaohua asked, "Fellow Taoists, the Thunder Accumulation Cave, I'm afraid, is extremely difficult, right?" "Alas, it's more than difficult." Sun Fian glanced at Xiaohua. If it was before, he would have mocked Xiaohua's ignorance. But now, his face was full of worry. He looked at Li Xiaowen and said, "Fellow Taoist Xiao must know. I previously discussed with fellow Taoist Li and investigated many dangerous places in our country of Xi. This Thunder Accumulation Cave was also mentioned, but we rejected it at that time." "Why?" Xiaohua asked curiously. "Is it more dangerous than Yulian Mountain and Southern Kaiping?" "What should I say?" Li Xiaowen only wanted to roll his eyes at Xiaohua, but he still explained patiently, "Southern Kaiping and Thunder Accumulation Cave can't be compared at all." "Well, fellow Taoist Xiao, the southern Rainbow Plains, the Yulian Mountains, the Fire Fusion Valley, and other places. Including the Hurricane Valley, are all places that loose cultivators like us or chi condensation cultivators can go to. Even low-level chi condensation cultivators can survive if they are lucky. But in the Thunder Accumulation Cave, heavenly thunder rolls with incomparable power. It's simply a place for foundation establishment and gold core cultivators. If we aura refining cultivators go in, we'll be struck by a thunderbolt and our souls will scatter. How can we look for treasures? I wonder what fellow Taoist Xiao thinks. Xiao Hua suddenly understood and nodded slightly. But then he asked curiously, as the name suggests, this Thunder Accumulation Cave should be a place where lightning accumulates. Then are there any spiritual objects or spiritual herbs inside? Otherwise, why would foundation establishment and gold core cultivators go there? Hearing Xiao Hua's question, Sun Fian said with a smile, fellow Taoist Xiao has a water attribute physique. Fellow Taoist Li has a fire attribute physique. And I, like fellow Taoist Xiao, also has a water attribute physique. However, there are many other fellow Taoists who have a variation physique of the 5 elements, such as a thunder attribute physique. When these fellow Taoists cultivate, although they won't be directly struck by lightning, if they can cultivate in a place like Thunder Accumulation Cave, they'll get twice the result with half the effort. Therefore, although this place is considered difficult by us, it is a rare place for them. In addition, there are also some thunder magic arts, such as the Thunder Palm and the Thunder Attraction skill, which can only be easily learned in the Thunder Accumulation Cave. Therefore, many people with profound cultivation come here to practice these magic arts. Li Xiaowen added, Thunder Palm? Xiao Hua's heart stirred. It seemed that the Feng clan's foundational spells had something like this, but he was baffled by it and threw it to the side. What's more, because the Thunder Accumulation Cave is quite dangerous and the lightning strikes are quite powerful, many seniors in the foundation establishment stage and the gold core stage come here when they encounter bottlenecks in their cultivation. Sun Fian echoed. In short, that place is not a place for us ordinary rogue cultivators. If that's the case, why does fellow Taoist Qing still want us to go there? Xiao Hua smiled and said, why would we go there when we know we will die? Ha ha! Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian heard this, and their faces suddenly brightened. They both held their foreheads and laughed heartily. Fellow Taoist Zhao's words hit the nail on the head. In our hearts, we are only afraid of the Thunder Accumulation Cave, but we forgot that from the South Color Plain to the Yulian Mountain, and finally to the Fire Fusion Valley and the Hurricane Valley, the difficulty is getting smaller and smaller. This is already the last place. How could fellow Taoist Qing let us give up halfway? Exactly. Let's go quickly, Li Xiaowen urged. The 30 days are approaching. We can't let this silk pouch become useless. After the 3 finished their discussion, they were full of confidence again. Li Xiaowen knew that Xiao Hua didn't know where the Thunder Accumulation Cave was, so he took the lead. Sun Fian accompanied Xiao Hua and followed behind. Several days later, just as the 3 of them were flying, Xiao Hua suddenly heard the faint sound of beating drums. Every time the drum sounded, it hit his heart, making it somewhat difficult for him to breathe. But what surprised him was that along with the drum sound, his meridians also faintly trembled. This was something that hadn't happened since he left Yellow Flower Ridge. The drum sound didn't continue, and it only lasted for a moment before it stopped. Xiao Hua looked at Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian from aside. The 2 of them didn't seem to be aware of it. He wanted to open his mouth and ask, but after thinking for a moment, he didn't speak. After flying for the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Xiao Hua had already heard several drum sounds. Only then did he hear Sun Fian say with a smile, fellow Taoist Xiao, did you hear the sound of thunder in the distance? Sound of thunder? Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. It seems to be the sound of drums? Ah, fellow Taoist Xiao really knows how to joke. This place isn't far from the Thunder Accumulation Cave, so naturally it's the sound of thunder. Sun Fian said with a smile. It's not fellow Taoist Zhao's fault. We didn't explain it clearly, so how would fellow Taoist Xiao know the reason? Li Xiaowen said, this Thunder Accumulation Cave is a flash of Jile Peak. This Gile Peak is very strange. It's incomparably tall, and there's a huge platform on top of the peak. For some reason, heavenly lightning often strikes this platform. As for the sound, it's really like what fellow Taoist Xiao said. It's similar to the sound of drums. This isn't the strangest thing. The most inconceivable thing is that after the heavenly lightning strikes the platform on top of the mountain, it doesn't disappear. Instead, it's transmitted from Gile Peak to this thunder accumulation cave in the middle of the mountain. Because it's transmitted indirectly by the mountain, its power is much weaker, so it can be used by cultivators like us. Xiaohua secretly curled his lips. When they left Hurricane Valley, they didn't say anything. After flying for several days, they still didn't say anything. Instead, they only said it after he made a fool of himself and asked, "I really don't know what they're thinking." However, Xiaohua also deeply understood that his experience was too shallow. If he didn't increase his knowledge, he was afraid that he would suffer in the future. Therefore, he thought of some travel notes in his space and the book he got from the Zhu family. "I'll just read it when I'm not cultivating. I don't want to be deceived in the future without knowing it," Xiaohua said in his heart. Seeing that Xiaohua was silent, Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian looked at each other and didn't say anything. The two of them were just surprised in their hearts. Not to mention that Xiaohua's flying speed was extremely fast, far from what they could compare with. This might be the reason why Xiaohua said that he learned a special spell. Xiaohua's cultivation base was just at the early stage of the second layer of the Qi refining realm when Li Xiaowen saw Xiaohua. Moreover, it looked like he had just set foot in the second layer of the Qi refining realm. That was in Li Xiaowen's eyes. Xiaohua, an 18-year-old loose cultivator, would never make any significant progress. At best, he would only be at the third layer of the Qi refining realm in this lifetime. However, since the southern Kaiping, in these short few days, Xiaohua's cultivation base had rapidly increased. It was almost faster than his flying speed. He actually went from the early stage of the second layer of the Qi refining realm directly to the peak of the second layer of the Qi refining realm. This kind of cultivation speed was extremely rare even in famous large sects. Of course, the peak of the second layer of the Qi refining realm wasn't a taboo for Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian. What they were worried about was that with Xiaohua's cultivation speed, as long as he had a suitable cultivation method, in less than a year, no, perhaps as long as half a year, Xiaohua would be able to cultivate to the fourth layer of the Qi refining realm. Even if he cultivated to the fifth layer of the Qi refining realm, the two of them would absolutely not be surprised. Was there a suitable cultivation method in Heaven Forsaken? Others might not know, but Li Xiaowen knew that talisman masters had special privileges in Heaven Forsaken. As long as Xiaohua could refine yellow talismans, Xiaohua could choose any cultivation method below the fifth layer of the Qi refining realm. After all, Heaven Forsaken didn't have high-level cultivation methods, but there were many low-level ones. However, Li Xiaowen still had a question. If Xiaohua had this kind of aptitude, then why? He was already 18 years old now, but why was his cultivation only at the second layer of the Qi refining realm? With this kind of cultivation aptitude, not to mention Blazing Flame School, even Xuanyin School and Splendid School would fight to the death for him. How could he possibly be reduced to becoming a loose cultivator and joining Heaven Forsaken? Of course, these doubts and astonishment were all a kind of appearance, but from the depths of their hearts, there was a kind of faint fear. Xiaohua's words, "I don't want others to know about some of I's matters, so please be careful with what you say, fellow Taoists," had been echoing in their ears, as if a large stone was pressing down on their hearts. They were very doubtful. If Xiaohua's cultivation was raised by another layer, and he could kill the two of them, would Xiaohua still leave them a way out? This was indeed gauging the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. At this time, why would Xiaohua need to use too much strength to kill them? The two people's silk bags had already been opened long ago, and Xiaohua was already very proficient in using force to break through. Dealing with them would be as easy as lifting a finger. Xiaohua didn't know what the two people were thinking. He looked at the Gile Peak that was getting closer and closer with interest. The Gile Peak was very high, and the platform on it was also very large, like a flat-top mountain. As several heavenly thunders fell on the flat top of the mountain, some ear-splitting drum sounds had already entered their ears. In addition, as they approached the Gile Peak, the surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth also began to become irritable. A kind of restless and unstable aura rippled in the surroundings. Xiao Hua tried to use Splendid Flame's mental cultivation method to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from the outside, but found that only a very small amount of spiritual energy could be absorbed into the meridians. Moreover, the spiritual energy was also abnormally active, almost uncontrolled by the mental cultivation method, and chaotically collided within the meridians. However, as the spiritual energy was refined, Xiao Hua's flesh and blood also had a slight reaction this time, but it was much weaker than the previous time in the Inferno Valley. Thinking of the matter in the Inferno Valley, Xiao Hua himself felt that it was inexplicable. Xiao Hua and the other two people were almost smooth sailing in the Inferno Valley, and they didn't encounter any danger. However, when Sun Fian's silk bag opened next to the magma, the hot and lively fire spiritual energy was absorbed by Xiao Hua's meridians. Xiao Hua's flesh and blood all over his body began to violently heat up, and he felt that countless small spots in his body were trembling, as if they were all absorbing the fire energy. Of course, this kind of abnormality was fleeting. Today, it was just a slight heat, and then it immediately disappeared without a trace, leaving Xiao Hua at a loss. That's the Gile Cave. Li Xiaowen pointed at a vague black spot in the middle of the Gile Peak. Chapter 1381. As usual, Li Xiaowen flew in the front, followed by Xiao Hua and Sun Fian. However, when they flew to a place not too far away from Gile Peak, the sound of thunder became louder and louder. Not only could they hear it, but what surprised Xiao Hua was that the sound seemed to hit his heart. Xiao Hua was still okay. When the thunder sounded, he only felt a wave of discomfort. Then the thunder stopped, and he returned to normal. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian couldn't do it. Their hands and feet trembled slightly, and their bones and tendons went soft. But after the thunder stopped, they still trembled and couldn't control themselves. This was still considered light. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian persisted for the time it took to smoke a cigarette. Seeing that they were close to Gile Peak, a wave of thunder shook. The two suddenly panicked and stopped. Moreover, a wave of redness appeared on their foreheads and disappeared immediately. It was the sign that the true qi in their meridians was somewhat chaotic, and their magical power was out of control. Xiao, fellow Taoist, are you okay? Seeing Xiao Hua's face as if nothing happened, and his eyes looking at Gile Cave, Sun Fian asked in astonishment. Xiao Hua saw the two's embarrassed state and frowned slightly. He smiled bitterly and said, "Who said it wasn't uncomfortable?" The sound of thunder was different from the usual heavenly thunder. It directly hit Ai's heart. It was very uncomfortable. So it's like this. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian heard and were surprised. What? Fellow Taoists, why didn't you fly forward? Xiao Hua saw the two talking and didn't move forward. Alas, we guessed wrong. Sun Fian smiled bitterly. Our cultivation is really low. This Gile Cave is really not a place we can come to. If I and fellow Taoist Li go any closer, I'm afraid there will be a risk of magical power backlash. Sun Fian used really twice in a row, reflecting the extreme helplessness in his heart. Rumble, rumble, rumble. This wave of thunder just increased in intensity, like a war drum urging people to go on stage. Xiao Hua felt an indescribable feeling in his heart. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian felt a burst of qi and blood in their chest, and their magical power was suddenly somewhat out of control. The two didn't dare to neglect and hurriedly flew back several hundred feet. Only then did they feel their magical power slowly calming down. Xiao Hua followed the two of them, and unconsciously turned his head to look at the distant thunder accumulation cave. If it's like this from afar, then what about inside the cave? What does it look like? Fellow Taoist Xiao. Li Xiaowen cupped his hands and said, I will speak frankly. It was hard to tell what expression Li Xiaowen had on his face. Was it embarrassment, shame, or relief? He, in Sun Fian, 2-peak 4th-layer Qi refining cultivators, actually had to rely on a 2nd-layer Qi refining cultivator. I understand. Xiao Hua waved his hand, took a deep breath, and said, Since we've come to this final place through life and death, how can we not take the risk? Since you two fellow Taoists can't go then, I will go and give it a try. AI, thank you so much, fellow Taoist Xiao. I just did some calculations. Today is the deadline. If we don't open it, then fellow Taoist Fu and the others will have died in vain. Sun Fian also sighed and said, However, fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't have to enter the thunder accumulation cave. If nothing unexpected happens, he can open the silk bag near the thunder accumulation cave. After all, fellow Taoist Qing is only a 5th-layer Qi refining cultivator. He can't enter the thunder accumulation cave. And I know. Also, I'll rest here for a bit. I'll be right back. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and turned around to fly towards the thunder accumulation cave. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian didn't dare to rest here. They could only stand there with folded arms and watch Xiao Hua quickly fly towards the thunder accumulation cave. The rolling thunder didn't seem to have much effect on him. Fellow Taoist Sun. Li Xiaowen saw Xiao Hua approaching the thunder accumulation cave and said unconsciously, Fellow Taoist Li, what's the matter? Sun Fian replied casually, Oh no, nothing. Li Xiaowen wanted to say something, but stopped. He didn't say anything and just watched quietly. Sun Fian also had mixed feelings. Seeing that Li Xiaowen didn't say anything, he didn't ask and just watched with his eyes like Li Xiaowen. Xiao Hua flew towards the thunder accumulation cave alone. He saw that the cave was getting bigger and bigger. The deafening sound of the drum beat his heart from time to time, but it only made him feel slightly uncomfortable. Moreover, after hearing a lot, he actually got used to it and didn't feel uncomfortable at the beginning. If this is the case, maybe I can break into the thunder accumulation cave. Xiao Hua gradually gained courage. The thunder accumulation peak was very dry. Moreover, the mountain rocks were maroon. There weren't many trees on the mountain, and it looked like a pure mountain. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth on the mountain was very abundant, far more than what Xiao Hua had seen in his life. However, Xiao Hua's perception was the same as before. The closer he got to the thunder accumulation cave, the more active the spiritual qi of heaven and earth became. Xiao Hua's death art couldn't draw spiritual qi into his body at all. It seems that only cultivators with special constitutions can cultivate here. Xiao Hua tried a few times, but gave up and focused on flying towards the thunder accumulation cave. The thunder accumulation cave in front of him wasn't big. The cave entrance was only about 10 feet wide. Waves of heat and spiritual qi of heaven and earth rushed out from the cave entrance. Moreover, it seemed that there were flashes of light in the pitch-black cave. In the flashes of light, he saw that the stone walls were red. Along with the flashes of light, there were also bursts of muffled sounds echoing in the cave. Xiao Hua's qi and blood surged, and he quickly flew to the side of the cave. This thunder is really strange. Xiao Hua thought of the thunder tribulation he experienced in the death art. That was a real heavenly thunder. Why did it feel different from the thunder here? With this in mind, Xiao Hua stretched out his hand and grabbed the last silk bag. The silk bag was exposed in the air, and strands of lively spiritual energy were sucked into the silk bag. Xiao Hua smiled and lowered his head to look at it, but a moment later, that smile froze at the corners of his mouth. The silk bag only had some brilliance, but it didn't make any sound. Needless to say, this wasn't the place to open the silk bag. Do I really have to enter the thunder accumulation cave? Xiao Hua bit his lips and looked at the thunder accumulation cave that was emitting light from time to time with some hesitation. But if he didn't enter after today, he wouldn't be able to open the silk bag again. His cultivation method Right at this moment, a rumbling sound came from his side. When Xiao Hua turned his head to look, he saw a flash of light rapidly flying over from the distant horizon. In the blink of an eye, it entered Xiao Hua's field of vision. What? What is this? Xiao Hua looked at the sword light flashing in the air. Every flash was extremely far away and thought very puzzledly. Rumble, rumble, rumble. A sound similar to thunder came from the sword light. Then, it stopped in front of the thunder accumulation cave. Xiao Hua rubbed his eyes. On a long, thin flying sword with countless electric lights lingering around it, stood a very ordinary-looking young cultivator. That cultivator's face was red, his eyebrows were sparse, and his eyes were looking at Xiao Hua in astonishment. Before Xiao Hua could withdraw his gaze from that strange flying sword, an unparalleled divine sense drowned Xiao Hua like a huge wave. At the same time, the majesty coming from the young cultivator's body directly covered Xiao Hua's body. Xiao Hua's head was dizzy. His heart seemed to have suffered a heavy blow. His body staggered, and his limbs went soft, as if he was going to collapse on the ground. At the moment when Xiao Hua couldn't hold on anymore, that divine sense swept over Xiao Hua's body, and the pressure also quickly withdrew. Xiao Hua felt a burst of relaxation and immediately bowed in salute. Itinerant cultivator Xiao Hua greets senior. Loose cultivator? That cultivator was slightly surprised. His figure descended from the flying sword. He pointed his finger, and that flying sword immediately shrunk to the size of a pellet. That cultivator grabbed it, and then sucked it into his mouth. Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. What do you cultivate? The young cultivator asked. This, Junior. Junior still doesn't have a fixed place to cultivate. Xiao Hua said honestly. I just joined Heaven Forsaken and am preparing to cultivate in Heaven Forsaken. Heaven Forsaken? What kind of sect is that? The young cultivator was slightly surprised. Senior, this is a spontaneous organization of loose cultivators. They are all loose cultivators below the 5th level of Qi refining. Xiao Hua said respectfully. Oh, so it's like that. The young cultivator suddenly understood. Then he asked with interest, I see that your cultivation is at the 2nd or 3rd level of Qi refining, but your magic power is much deeper than others of the same level. This really makes I surprised. Then, he added, moreover, you're a loose cultivator. This really makes I scratch in my head. Hearing that young cultivator talking to him amiably, Xiao Hua's heart warmed for no reason. He quickly bowed and said, Senior, this junior also doesn't know. Xiao Hua. Actually, this poor Taoist also cultivated from the 1st level of Qi condensation. Although this poor Taoist can't see through you, this poor Taoist can be sure that your cultivation absolutely isn't limited to Qi condensation and foundation establishment. Even core formation or nascent soul can be expected. You also shouldn't undervalue yourself. Xiao Hua's heart was moved. Just as he was about to speak, that young cultivator said again, this thunder accumulation cave isn't a place that ordinary cultivators can come to. Generally, people at the peak of Qi refining would be nervous if they come here. You can actually come to the entrance of the thunder accumulation cave. From this, it can be seen that your future cultivation. Oh, right? Why did you take the risk to come here? Xiao Hua sighed and threw away the other thought. He respectfully handed over the silk bag and said, you need to take this silk bag into the thunder accumulation cave. This silk bag can be opened, and you can say a place name. This junior needs to go to that place. Enter the thunder accumulation cave? What a joke. The young cultivator looked at Xiao Hua and then looked at the thunder accumulation cave not far away. A trace of a bitter smile appeared on his face. He pointed his finger and said, with your cultivation, forget it. I won't say anything about you. It's not easy for a loose cultivator to cultivate. I also know that. Give me the silk bag. Xiao Hua was delighted and hurriedly handed it over. That cultivator didn't take it. With a wave of his hand, the silk bag flew into the air and followed him into the thunder accumulation cave. As the young cultivator's figure disappeared into the cave entrance, a burst of brilliance flashed. Moreover, a burst of crackling sound was heard. It seemed to come from lightning strikes on the cave walls. In just a moment, that young cultivator walked out with a very relaxed expression. He threw the silk bag to Xiaohua and said a place name. When Xiaohua heard this place name, he couldn't help but be dumbstruck. Chapter 1382. That young cultivator walked out of the thunder accumulation cave. His whole body was surrounded by electric light, but his expression was the same as usual. There was nothing wrong with him. The cultivator tossed the silk bag in front of Xiaohua and said, "The silk bag says you need to go to the Thousand Zhang Peak." Thousand Zhang Peak. Hearing this name, Xiaohua had an indescribable feeling in his heart. Didn't Kai Zhuoxia just ask me to go to Thousand Zhang Peak? But she's already gone with Li Zongbao from the Utmost Happiness faction. She definitely forgot about me. Thank you, Senior. Xiaohua took the silk bag and bowed very respectfully. The Thousand Zhang Peaks loose cultivator is also famous. But you're on your own. That young cultivator wanted to say something, but hesitated. He nodded at Xiaohua, turned around, and walked into the thunder accumulation cave again. Xiaohua couldn't help but feel envious as he watched that young cultivator calmly enter and exit the thunder accumulation cave. It wasn't until the lightning flickered and the young cultivator's back disappeared that Xiaohua withdrew his gaze. He secretly pondered, "This senior, who is he? His cultivation level is far from what I can see. Moreover, it's rare for him to be so kind and amiable. It's really rare." Afterwards, Xiaohua didn't hesitate and quickly flew back to Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian's side. Although Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian were far away, they saw Xiaohua's situation in front of the thunder accumulation cave. Seeing Xiaohua fly back, they came up together and cupped their hands, saying, "Congratulations, fellow Taoist Xiao. You can actually ask a senior to help." Where? Xiaohua looked at the two and didn't answer their question. Instead, he asked, "Fellow Taoists, who is that senior? I presume you already know?" This. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian's expressions changed slightly. They looked at each other and said with a smile on their faces, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, we don't know this senior's appearance and magical power. It's not good to make wild guesses." "I see." Xiaohua sighed and said casually, "Fellow Taoists, the place we're going to is Thousand Zhang Peak." Thousand Zhang Peak. The two of them were stunned at first. Then they were wild with joy. They slapped their own foreheads and cried out, "Oh, I forgot about the Thousand Zhang Peak. That 1,000-feet-old man is a famous rogue cultivator in the country of Xi. Isn't his orthodoxy what we rogue cultivators yearn for even in our dreams?" Fellow Taoist Qing, you've actually found Old Man 1,000 Feet's legacy. You've actually shared such a rare opportunity with us rogue cultivators. Your noble character and unquestionable integrity are truly admirable. Actually, fellow Taoist Qing is still the most meticulous. Even if there are cultivators who covet my actions, they probably don't know that my true objective is 1,000 Feet Peak. Sun Fian's face was filled with longing as he smiled and said, "Regardless of whether it's the southern Kaiping, Yulian Mountain, Yunxi Marsh, Fire Melting Valley, Hurricane Canyon, or Thunder Accumulation Cave, none of them have anything to do with the Thousand Zhang Peak. Moreover, there's still more than 10 days of travel from here to the Thousand Zhang Peak. If it weren't for fellow Xiao telling us, we wouldn't have thought of the Thousand Zhang Peak no matter what. Then what are we waiting for?" Xiaohua smiled. "That's right. What are we waiting for?" Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian said in unison. Then, the three of them rose up and flew in the direction of the Thousand Zhang Peak. 10 days passed in the blink of an eye. Under Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian's guidance, Xiaohua smoothly arrived near the Thousand Zhang Peak. Although 10 days were short, Xiaohua benefited a lot. His cultivation had already reached the peak of the second layer of the Qi refining realm when he was in Yulian Mountain. Then, after a period of cultivation, he easily broke through to the third layer of the Qi refining realm. However, Xiaohua didn't have a cultivation method for the third layer of the Qi refining realm. The true chi in his entire meridians still flowed according to the mental cultivation method for the second layer of the chi refining realm. Although his magic power increased when he broke through, it stagnated afterward. Only after Xiao Hua obtained a cultivation method for the third layer of the chi refining realm could his magic power increase again. Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian had witnessed Xiao Hua's breakthrough from the second layer of the chi refining realm to the third layer of the chi refining realm. They were extremely shocked. When they broke through that year, they had spent a lot of effort. How could it be accomplished so easily by Xiao Hua in just one night? However, they could only forcefully suppress this shock in their hearts. Their faces were filled with smiles as they cupped their hands and congratulated Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua only responded indifferently. It was as if this kind of rapid advancement in cultivation was a matter of course. It made him appear even more unfathomable. Actually, at the same time that Xiao Hua consumed the marrow-cleansing pill to increase his magic power, he was also carefully comprehending the heavenly ways ascension realm. This comprehension should be countless times more difficult than cultivating a mental cultivation method. However, in this cryptic heavenly way, every trace of comprehension made Xiao Hua feel incomparably comfortable and made his mind incomparably joyful. Compared to this, the breakthrough of cultivation didn't excite too much of his emotions. He had already faintly felt that this comprehension was far from as simple as shortening the time of cultivation. Perhaps this comprehension was the real way of cultivation. In addition, in these 10 days, Xiao Hua had already figured out some things. For example, when he went to the 100 Herbs sect, he encountered a light green brilliance in the Mount of Mang, and the way Li Zongbao hurriedly chased after that brilliance, and the information Kai Zhuoxia got for being interrogated by the blue bears. Could all these be related to the 1,000 feet peak? Of course, what puzzled Xiao Hua was that when Xiao Hua met Qing Fengmin, Qing Fengmin seemed to have given a light green object as compensation to Zhang Huanqi, a disciple of the Shanghua sect. If he wanted to keep the matter of the 1,000 feet peak a secret, he wouldn't have easily divulged it, unless that object was different from the one Kai Zhuoxia obtained in the Mount of Mang, or the light green brilliance that Xiao Hua saw himself wasn't obtained by Kai Zhuoxia. Moreover, it was different from the object given by Qing Fengmin. Also, Li Zongbao, as a genius disciple of the Utopia faction, he didn't seem to have any interest in the 1,000 feet peak. Could it be that he and Kai Zhuoxia really... Oh, by the way, when I arrive at the 1,000 feet peak, should I send Kai Zhuoxia that messaging charm? Or how should I reply to Kai Zhuoxia when I see her? Xiao Hua flew in the air and suddenly thought of this. Fellow cultivator Xiao, the 1,000 feet peak is not far ahead, right? What are you thinking about? Sun Fian, who was beside him, said with a smile. Although Sun Fian's face was full of smiles, his heart had never calmed down. Not long after leaving the Thunder Accumulation Cave, Xiao Hua broke through to level 3 of the Qi refining stage. Because he didn't have the corresponding cultivation arts, Xiao Hua's magic power didn't increase, and his cultivation also stagnated. However, in these 10 days, Sun Fian could feel Xiao Hua's progress every day. It was a kind of progress that he couldn't explain. He couldn't help but be vigilant. He couldn't help but treat Xiao Hua as a fellow cultivator of the same level as himself. He eats nothing. Fellow cultivator Sun, I was just thinking that when we left Jingwa City, there were 6 of us. Now, only 3 of us have reached the 1,000 feet peak. Then what about the other fellow cultivators? Is it that half of them are also exhausted? Xiao Hua said with a smile. In this way, won't my strength be greatly damaged? Alas, fellow cultivator is thinking too much. Cultivators are the most heaven-defying. All of them are fighting for that trace of opportunity to cultivate. Especially us individual cultivators. We are at a disadvantage in all aspects. If we weren't vicious and merciless, we would have been exterminated many times by the disciples of sex. The matter of Yunxi Lake, I'm afraid that fellow cultivator Xiao didn't know the function of the rainbow epiphyllum. That's why. Fellow cultivator's son, Li Xiaowen scolded. Didn't I tell fellow cultivator before? Don't mention this matter again in the future. Why did you mention it again today? I was unwilling in my heart. Sun Fian smiled bitterly. If we could obtain the rainbow epiphyllum and refine the revolving illumination pill, we might be able to cultivate divine sense before we reach the peak of the chi refining stage. Or perhaps we could take it when we reach the peak of the chi refining stage and strengthen our divine sense. The revolving illumination pill can strengthen divine sense? Xiao Hua suddenly realized. Of course, Fan Dao Mao only said half of it. He didn't want to mention it later, so he didn't ask about the revolving illumination pill again. At this time, he understood why everyone was so blatantly fighting. It was all because of divine sense. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua used his mind to sweep the space. The rainbow epiphyllum had already been in the space for dozens of days, which was equivalent to dozens of years outside. At this time, whether it was the rainbow epiphyllum's body or the seven-colored halo floating above it, they were all much stronger than before. Moreover, the rainbow epiphyllum's body was gradually turning from a pitch-black color to a crimson red. Cough, cough. The matter is already in the past. It's useless to say more. Everyone has their own ideas. Others can't force them. Li Xiaowen coughed and secretly winked at Sun Fian. We've already safely arrived at the 1,000-foot peak. Once we meet up with the other fellow Taoists of the Heaven Forsaken, we'll go look for the 1,000-foot old man's orthodoxy together. Perhaps the next 1,000-foot old man will be born from the Heaven Forsaken. Sun Fian understood tacitly. Xiao Hua withdrew his mind from the space, as if he hadn't heard Sun Fian's question. He looked at the gloomy sky in front of him and was about to speak when he suddenly frowned. He slightly tilted his head and looked behind him. What's wrong? Fellow Taoist Xiao? Li Xiaowen noticed Xiao Hua's abnormality and asked. Xiao Hua withdrew his gaze and shook his head as if nothing had happened. He said, It's nothing. I was just casually looking around. I'm afraid that someone is following behind us. How could there be? We've been flying for dozens of days and haven't found anything strange. Sun Fian also said with a smile. The three people had just flown for half a cup of tea's time when Li Xiaowen suddenly stopped. He looked back and shouted, I keep feeling that something's wrong. I don't know. Is there someone behind us? Where? Xiao Hua and Sun Fian both turned their heads. Xiao Hua asked even more exaggeratedly. There was nothing behind them. There wasn't a single person, but Li Xiaowen still didn't feel at ease. He said, Eyes Heart is on guard. How about we hide for a moment first and see if there's any situation? What does fellow Taoist Xiao think? Xiao Hua nodded. Fellow Taoist Li is right. There's no harm in waiting. The three people all landed and found a place to hide. Just as they hid, they saw a figure behind them. Sure enough, while flying and stopping, it chased after them. However, since that senior only said it was the 1,000-feet peak, then it naturally belongs to the 1,000-feet peak. Alas, I also thought that only I, the heaven-forsaken itinerant cultivators, would come to this 1,000-feet peak. Looking at this situation, I'm afraid it's somewhat troublesome. What kind of trouble? Li Xiaowen said coldly. Fellow Taoist Sun didn't notice? These cultivators from sects are all at the 5th or 6th level of qi condensation, and they're not young either. I'm afraid they're at the bottom of their respective sections. It's also because they don't have any future prospects in their sects that they want to come here to try their luck. They definitely don't dare to mention it to their seniors in their sections. When my heaven-forsaken itinerant cultivators all arrive, we'll kill them all and cut off their thoughts first. Isn't that right? Sun Fian also sneered. I've been waiting here for fellow Taoist Qing's signal yet, so I'm afraid he's already set up an ambush. As Xiao Hua listened to the two's chatter, he looked all around. The 1,000-feet peak in the distance really wasn't tall. It was really only about 1,000 feet tall, much smaller than Yulian Mountain and the others. However, The 1,000-feet peak's surroundings were all low mountainous areas, which made it seem even taller. The 1,000-feet peak didn't look any different from an ordinary mountain. The mountain was rugged with rocks and lush trees. There were even some streams flowing down from certain places on the mountain, and in the shadows of those trees, there were also many caves. Seeing this, Xiao Hua's heart stirred. Could it be there's something fishy about these caves? Sure enough, he heard Li Xiaowen say in a low voice, but there are many caves on this 1,000-feet peak. I heard that many cultivators came here before, but no one found Elder 1,000 Feet's real immortal's cave among these hundreds and thousands of caves. Where do you think we should go to find fellow Taoist Qing? I'm afraid fellow Taoist Qing obtained Elder 1,000 Feet's keepsake this time and found out the location of the immortal's cave. That's why he called us here. Sun Fian nodded. Otherwise, fellow Taoist Qing wouldn't have to go through so much trouble to eliminate some fellow Taoists first. Elder 1,000 Feet's keepsake? Xiao Hua, who hadn't spoken all this time, asked curiously, what kind of thing is this keepsake? Fellow Taoist Xiao. I thought fellow Taoist Xiao was laughing silly. Li Xiaowen said with a smile. So you're still listening? There are different opinions about what Elder 1,000 Feet's keepsake is. Some say it's a cyan jade slip, some say it's a cyan magic tool, and some say it's a cyan spirit beast. Left and right, they all say it's cyan. Elder 1,000 Feet has a wood attribute constitution. Xiao Hua came to a realization. That's right, so this senior's keepsake is also a wood attribute. It should be cyan. Sun Fian nodded. Oh, so that's how it is. Xiao Huan nodded in his heart. All right, fellow Taoist Xiao, do you still have that silk bag? Take it out and see if there are any clues? Li Xiaowen suddenly said. Of course. Sun Fian heard and cried out. Better take out all the silk bags for us to see. As a result, the three people's 4 silk bags didn't have any changes. Fellow Taoist Li and fellow Taoist Sun don't have fellow Taoist Qing's messaging talisman? Xiao Hua said in a low voice. No, fellow Taoist Qing said that we can't use messaging talismans to find him in this treasure hunt. It was a pity that Ma Qingqing's messaging talisman in Xiao Hua's hand had been used up long ago. Otherwise, he could have tried using it. We can't always stay here, Xiao Hua said in a low voice. It looks like there aren't any other cultivators coming for a while. Just as he was speaking, there was the sound of something breaking through the air from afar. Xiao Hua and the others hurriedly hid. When they saw the people flying over clearly, Li Xiaowen let out a long sigh of relief and said with a smile, Finally, I've seen the people abandoned by the heavens. As he said this, he flew up and greeted them. Sun Fian also had a smile on his face as he followed behind Li Xiaowen. Xiao Hua didn't recognize the 2 people flying over. These 2 people's appearances were a bit strange. One had a bronze face, extremely thick eyebrows, and large eyes. The other person's face was full of pockmarks, his eyes were extremely small, and he had a red nose. He looked like a drunken old man. These 2 people's cultivations were at the 5th layer of the Qi refining realm. When the 2 people saw Li Xiaowen and the others, their faces were also astonished. They flew close to each other and cupped their hands in salute. Fellow Taoist Li, you've been here for a long time? Then, their gazes swept over Sun Fian and Xiao Hua. Of course, these 2 people's gazes only swept over Xiao Hua, who was at the 3rd layer of the Qi refining realm, and only looked at Sun Fian. Fellow Taoist Zheng must be joking. Fellow Taoist and fellow Taoist Meng just passed the test with their cultivations. How could I be ahead of you? I just came here. Li Xiaowen cupped his hands and said, I introduced these 2 fellow Taoists from the heavens abandoned by the heavens. As he spoke, he told the 2 people Xiao Hua and Sun Fian's names and said to Xiao Hua and Sun Fian with a smile, These are the famous loose cultivators of the heavens abandoned by the heavens, fellow Taoist Zheng Chuyong and fellow Taoist Meng Xian. This time we've been fated to meet these 2 fellow Taoists, and we've really benefited a lot from it. Sun Fian and Xiao Hua stepped forward and saluted. The 2 of them only cupped their hands for Sun Fian and only slightly nodded to Xiao Hua. Li Xiaowen frowned slightly and wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't speak. Fellow Taoist Li, have you seen fellow Taoist Qing? Meng Xian asked. Not yet. I also just arrived. I haven't seen a single fellow Taoist from the heavens abandoned by the heavens. Li Xiaowen said, however, I've seen a lot of other cultivators. What's going on? Zheng Qiaoyang was taken aback and asked. Li Xiaowen recounted what happened just now and said, I, fellow Taoist Xiao, and fellow Taoist Sun were alone and didn't dare to move forward. It's fate that we met these two fellow Taoists. The five of us will advance and retreat together, and we should be able to move forward to find fellow Taoist Qing. And I also have the same intention. Zheng Qiaoyang glanced at Meng Xian and turned to reply to Li Xiaowen. Li Xiaowen was overjoyed and cupped his hands. Fellow Taoist Zheng and fellow Taoist Meng, please go first. We're all fellow Taoists of the heavens abandoned by the heavens, so why bother about who goes first? Let's go together. I want to see which sect's disciple dares to disturb the actions of the heavens abandoned by the heavens. Zheng Qiaoyang smiled and flicked his sleeves. His figure fluttered slightly and flew forward. Meng Xian also smiled and cupped his hands in a somewhat strange manner. He turned his head and also prepared to fly forward. Li Xiaowen had a smile on his face as he followed closely behind the two of them. Upon seeing this, Sun Fian and Xiao Hua retreated a body's distance, preparing to fly forward with the three of them. However, right at this moment, a sudden change occurred. Zheng Qiaoyang and Meng Xian's figures in front abruptly turned around. The two of them activated binding talismans in their hands and struck Li Xiaowen and the other two like lightning. Li Xiaowen was delighted to see fellow Taoists of the heavens abandoned by the heavens for the first time. How could he have expected that these two would suddenly attack? Even Xiao Hua was already on guard at his heart, but he absolutely didn't expect that these fellow Taoists he had just met would turn hostile so quickly. He was also struck by the binding talisman, and his four limbs were tightly bound. Moreover, the three people were bound, and their magic power immediately stagnated. Their entire figures fell from the air. Li Xiaowen's mouth and tongue could still move, and he asked in a stern voice, Fellow Taoist Zheng, what are you doing? What am I doing? Zheng Qiaoyang's figure whirled around and rushed towards Li Xiaowen, his mouth saying, There's only 1,000 feet Elder's Mantle. One less person fighting over it. I have a slight chance. Before his voice even fell, he had already arrived in front of Li Xiaowen. His right hand slightly reached out and grabbed Li Xiaowen's neck. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Qidian.com to cast a recommendation vote or monthly vote. Chapter 1384. Zheng Qiaoyang stretched out his hand and grabbed Li Xiaowen's neck. His fingers exerted force, and with a crack, Li Xiaowen's neck snapped. A stream of blood flowed from the corner of Li Xiaowen's mouth. Li Xiaowen immediately lost his life. Although Li Xiaowen was dead, his eyes were still wide open. He really didn't expect that he didn't lose his life in the southern color plain, Yulian Mountain, and other dangerous places. Instead, he came to the Thousand Zhang Peak and encountered a fellow Taoist from Heaven Forsaken. Yet, he was killed by this fellow Taoist he was familiar with. At the same time, Zheng Qiaoyang killed Li Xiaowen. Meng Xian also flew behind Sun Fian. His fist smashed into the back of Sun Fian's head. Like a ripe watermelon, Sun Fian's brain burst open. He was even less likely to live. These two people cooperated with tacit understanding and killed in a breath's time. Even though Xiao Hua had already killed many people, but in front of these two people's lightning-fast killing moves, he could only be dumbstruck. Zheng Qiaoyang and Meng Xian killed Li Xiaowen and Meng Xian at almost the same time. However, they ignored Xiao Hua, who was falling straight to the ground. They tore off the storage pouches on Li Xiaowen's and Meng Xian's corpses, then searched their sleeves and took out a spirit storage pouch each. Spirit storage pouch? Meng Xian almost raised his head and laughed heartily. This Li Xiaowen is indeed rich and overbearing. as expected of a talisman master from heaven forsaken. He even has a spirit storage pouch. Zheng Chuyang was also delighted. He threw away the corpse in his hand. Just as he was about to open the spirit storage pouch to take a look, Xiao Hua, who had fallen beside him, suddenly moved. Xiao Hua stretched his slender arms to the sides of his body as if he was stretching. With a burst of crackling sounds, several rays of light flickered and then were annihilated. The binding talisman on Xiao Hua's body was completely destroyed by Xiao Hua. Immediately, Xiao Hua didn't hesitate to urge his magic power. With a speed much faster than Zheng Chuyang and Meng Xian's, he rapidly rushed towards the two people. The two people were originally extremely close to Xiao Hua. In just a breath's time, Xiao Hua was already close to the two people. Hearing the sound of Xiao Hua breaking through the spell with brute force, the two of them turned around, but by the time they turned around, Xiao Hua had already rushed in front of them. The two of them didn't have time to be shocked by Xiao Hua's speed, nor did they have time to think about how Xiao Hua was able to break free of the binding talisman. One of them was just about to clench his fist, wanting to strike Xiao Hua, while the other slapped his hand, wanted to take out a yellow talisman from his storage bag. But just as the two of them were about to move, Xiao Hua's arms suddenly thrust forward. Puff, puff. Two sounds came from the two people's bodies at the same time. Xiao Hua had a devil spear head in one hand and a devil spear shaft in the other. He stabbed them from under their armpits into their chests. Black light revolved around the two magic tools, and the two lost their vitality. Their corpses fell to the ground one after the other. The only difference was that Li Xiaowen died with his eyes wide open, while Sun Fian's eyes were closed. As for the two, they died with their eyes wide open. Just like Li Xiaowen, they were also filled with disbelief and unwillingness. They really didn't expect that Xiao Hua, who was at the third level of qi condensation, would actually become their nemesis. Xiao Hua's body and mind followed the four corpses as they fell. His expression was cold as he looked at the mangled corpses on the ground. It was unknown what he was thinking in his heart. In no more than a snap of a finger, the four fellow Taoists heaven forsaken, who were still talking and laughing just a moment ago, had lost their lives. The four fellow Taoists who had just agreed to advance and retreat together had become enemies in the blink of an eye, fighting to the death. Xiao Hua let out a long sigh. He didn't know what he could say. Needless to say, if he didn't take advantage of this opportunity to kill Zheng Xiaoyang and Meng Xian, when the two of them were prepared to face him together, he was afraid that he would be in grave danger. The one who strikes first gains the advantage, and the one who strikes later suffers a calamity. This should be the logic. Forget it. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. I hope that in your next life, it's better if you don't cultivate. As Xiao Hua spoke, he urged the magic power in his left hand and cast a spell. It was precisely the basic spell, Small Flame. With a slight flick of his finger, four sparks flew to the four corpses, immediately igniting the corpses. In no more than a moment, the corpses were burned to ashes. Looking at the burning flames, Xiao Hua was slightly proud. This flame spell was precisely the basic spell that he had comprehended in the past 10 days. Other spells were fine, but this spell related to fire, he had learned it long ago. It was just that he had the opportunity to try it out today. Soon after, Xiao Hua put the two spirit storage pouches on the ground into his sleeve. Then, he picked up the four spirit storage pouches and roughly looked at their items before putting them into his space. There was no need to mention the spirit stones, spirit herbs, and medicinal pills. What made Xiao Hua the most excited was that in addition to the spells and incomplete magic tools in Sun Fian, Zheng Chuyang, and Meng Xian spirit storage pouches, he actually found a fire attribute cultivation method called Raising Fire to the Heavens in Li Xiaowen's spirit storage pouch. Although it was only at the 5th layer of qi refining, to Xiao Hua, it was absolutely an unexpected harvest. Li Xiaowen, you already have a cultivation method in your spirit storage pouch, yet you still say you don't have it. This young master is only at the 2nd layer of qi refining, and you're already so stingy. How can this young master reprimand you? Xiao Hua recalled the scene of him exchanging the spirit storage pouches with Li Xiaowen at the southern colored plains and became angry. This young master even spared you a lot of spirit stones. This is great, they all belong to this young master again. After seeing the cultivation method, Xiao Hua's previous favorable impression of Li Xiaowen had long since faded away. Then, he picked up the 4 empty spirit storage pouches and looked at them. He couldn't help but curl his lips. These 4 spirit storage pouches weren't made by the 7 Skills sect. The space inside them was at least 10 times smaller than the 2 7 Skills sect spirit storage pouches that Xiao Hua obtained before. No wonder the 7 Skills sect's spirit storage pouches are calculated by top-grade spirit stones. It really makes sense. Li Xiaowen and the other spirit storage pouches, and this young master spirit storage pouch, really can't compare to them. Xiao Hua thought and gave up on the idea of holding onto the spirit storage pouches. He casually tossed the 4 spirit storage pouches in his hand and flew away. Without any hesitation, he quickly flew in the direction of the Thousand Zhang Peak. Without Li Xiaowen and Sun Fian, Xiao Hua seemed to have more freedom and agility. When he flew close to the Thousand Zhang Peak, he landed and found a place to hide. He carefully observed the Thousand Zhang Peak. After about the time it took to eat a meal, another dozen or so qi condensation cultivators arrived. Looking at their clothes, they didn't seem to be rogue cultivators. They were exactly like Li Xiaowen said. Each of them flew in front of the Thousand Zhang Peak and took out a light green object from their spirit storage pouches. Those light green objects floated in the air and quickly flew into different caves. Those cultivators also chased after the light green objects. Strange, why does everyone have this kind of light green object? Xiao Hua was surprised. Could it be that there isn't only one? Just as he was thinking, 2 more figures flew in from the direction opposite of Xiao Hua. When they entered Xiao Hua's field of vision, his eyes lit up. These 2 people weren't bystanders. They were precisely Kai Zhuoxia and Li Zongbao, whom he recognized. The 2 of them seemed to be using dual flying talismans. Their flying speed was extremely fast. In just a short moment, they arrived in front of the Thousand Zhang Peak. The 2 of them stopped in midair. Li Zongbao looked around in an extremely confident and at ease manner. Kai Zhuoxia's eyebrows were shining. She had a smile on her face as she said something to him. The 2 of them talked for a while. However, unlike the others, they didn't take out light green objects. Instead, they looked into the distance. When they looked outside the Thousand Zhang Peak, Kai Zhuoxia became even more anxious. These 2 people, what are they doing? The others have already entered the cave. Xiao Hua was very puzzled. He secretly said, could it be that they're still waiting for someone? When this thought appeared in his mind, Xiao Hua felt as if he was struck by lightning. He stood there blankly. Was there still a need to say it? Who were they waiting for? Weren't they waiting for him? Counting with his fingers, wasn't today the day he and Kai Zhuoxia had agreed to come to the Thousand Zhang Peak? In an instant, Xiao Hua's heart felt warm. The bit of confidence that had just been crushed by Zheng Chuyang and Meng Xian gradually recovered. In the distance, Li Zongbao wasn't the slightest bit anxious. He only whispered something into Kai Zhuoxia's ear. Kai Zhuoxia's face was apologetic, as if she was explaining something. In the end, just as Kai Zhuoxia bit her lip and was about to say something, Xiao Hua no longer hesitated. His figure flew up and flew towards the 2 people. Xiao Hua's flying speed wasn't fast. He was still around the 5th layer of the aura refining realm. Li Zongbao and Kai Zhuoxia saw him from a distance. Li Zongbao's face carried a thoughtful smile. Kai Zhuoxia, on the other hand, was somewhat delighted. She pulled on Li Zongbao's sleeve, and the 2 of them went up to welcome him together. Greetings, Senior Li, greetings, fellow Taoist Kai. Xiao Hua's face carried a sincere smile as he saluted from afar. Fellow Taoist Xiao, sure enough, you didn't go back on your word. I thought fellow Taoist might not be able to come. I don't know how fellow Taoist managed to convince your sect's master. Fellow Taoist actually advanced to the 3rd layer of the aura refining realm. Before Kai Zhuoxia could return the salute, she saw the changes in Xiao Hua's cultivation level. Extremely astonished, she said, "Half a year ago, fellow Taoist Xiao was still in the first layer of the aura refining realm. This in just half a year, fellow Taoist Xiao advanced to the third layer of the aura refining realm. This is truly gratifying, truly worthy of congratulations." Afterwards, she glanced at Li Zongbao again and sighed. "It's still better to be a disciple of a sect. Fellow Taoist Zhuoxia, everyone has their own fate. That's all." Li Zongbao slightly shook his head and smiled. "Oh, right. Fellow Taoist Xiao, I'd like to introduce you. This is fellow Taoist Li Zongbao from the Utmost Happiness sect." Kai Zhuoxia suddenly realized. Hee, fellow Taoist Zhuoxia. I've met fellow Taoist Xiao before." Li Zongbao laughed. You've met fellow Taoist Xiao before?" Kai Zhuoxia was very puzzled. She turned her head and asked, "Of course." Chapter 1385. That's right, I am really a loose cultivator now, Xiao Hua whispered with a gloomy expression. Kai Zhuoxia was extremely surprised. She turned her head to look at Li Zongbao and comforted Xiao Hua. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, as the saying goes, don't ask where a hero comes from. Miracles happen naturally. With your character, the heavens will naturally take care of you. It won't be difficult for you to leave your name in the cultivation world of our Xiaoyu continent. Moreover, fellow Taoist Xiao was only at the first layer of the aura refining realm half a year ago. In this short period of time, you can advance to the third layer of the aura refining realm. As long as you practice diligently, whether you're in a sect or a loose cultivator, you'll have a bright future." Just as Kai Zhuoxia was comforting Xiao Hua, Li Zongbao's expression was somewhat strange. Xiao Hua felt a divine sense sweep past him. Then he heard Li Zongbao ask, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, last time I met you in the Imitation Mountain Range, there was no news of Shang Huoming's destruction. But a month later, there was news of Shang Huoming's destruction and the 100 Herb sect occupying Yellow Flower Ridge. Fellow Taoist, how did you escape?" "Fellow Taoist Zongbao, this isn't the place to talk. Why don't we enter the 1,000-feet peak and then explain in detail?" Kai Zhuoxia rebuked. "I'll listen to fellow Taoist Zhuoxia's instructions." Li Zongbao didn't object and only smiled. While speaking, Kai Zhuoxia patted her storage pouch and took out a palm-sized, strangely shaped, light green jade object. It seemed to be in the shape of a wild beast. Kai Zhuoxia slightly shook the jade object in front of Xiao Hua. Just as she was about to activate it with her magic power, Xiao Hua hurriedly said, "Fellow Taoist Kai, please wait. Is there something else, fellow Taoist Xiao?" Kai Zhuoxia stopped and asked curiously. Xiao Hua was very apologetic. He cupped his hands and said, "Actually, there's something else I haven't told you." "What is it?" Li Zongbao asked indifferently. "It's like this, Senior Li, fellow Taoist Kai. Although Junior is already a loose cultivator, I have joined the Heaven Forsaken. Junior came to the 1,000-feet peak because of the Heaven Forsaken arrangement. Junior didn't especially come to meet fellow Taoist Kai." Xiao Hua said these words, and his heart relaxed. "Senior Li? Fellow Taoist Xiao is Heaven Forsaken? An itinerant cultivator forsaken by the heavens has also come to the 1,000-Zhang Peak?" Kai Zhuoxia was startled at first. Then she suddenly understood and turned to look at Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao's eyes flashed with a strange light as he thoughtfully looked at Xiao Hua. After a while, he asked then, "Fellow Taoist, Xiao means you don't want to enter with us? The other rogue cultivators who are only here to wait for the heavens to abandon them? This junior has the intention to follow the two seniors in, but this matter still needs to be explained to the two seniors." Xiao Hua shook his head. "Junior has been here for half a day. Apart from the two fellow Taoists accompanying me and the other two fellow Taoists, I haven't seen any other loose cultivators abandoned by the heavens. There are 4 other fellow Taoists." Li Zongbao was slightly taken aback. He looked around vigilantly. "Alas, the other 4 fellow Taoists have already perished together." Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Kai Zhuoxia and Li Zongbao looked at each other. Kai Zhuoxia also sighed and shook her head. I'm afraid it's because of old man Thousand Zhang's legacy. Before they even entered the Thousand Zhang Peak, they already started fighting. What about fellow Taoist Xiao? You're already at the third layer of the Qi refining realm, so you're also a loose cultivator. Shang Huoming's cultivation method. I'm afraid you don't have it anymore, right? Compared to when you met fellow Taoist Zhuoxia half a year ago, things have changed. What does fellow Taoist Xiao plan to do? Li Zongbao said with a chuckle. When Kai Zhuoxia heard this, she suddenly understood. Doubt appeared on her face. Of course, Kai Zhuoxia invited Xiao Hua to the Thousand Zhang Peak because Xiao Hua was a disciple of the sect and wouldn't fight with her for old man Thousand Zhang's legacy. Moreover, Xiao Hua's cultivation was also low, so she could control it. And the most important thing was that she was alone at that time and wanted someone to accompany her. At that time, Xiao Hua was extremely suitable, but now, everything had changed. Xiao Hua didn't have his sect cultivation method. Xiao Hua also needed old man Thousand Zhang's legacy. And the most embarrassing thing was that Kai Zhuoxia now had Li Zongbao as her companion. When Xiao Hua flew over, he had already made up his mind. He cupped his hands and said, Junior just came over to explain things to seniors. I already obtained a cultivation method here, so I can cultivate to the 5th layer of the Qi refining realm. From the 3rd layer of the Qi refining realm to the 5th layer of the Qi refining realm, Junior doesn't know how many years it will take. Therefore, if there are other cultivation methods in old man Thousand Zhang's legacy that seniors don't need, Junior won't refuse. If there aren't any, Junior won't be greedy and will just give some medicinal pills to Junior. Of course, as Seniorly said, everything has changed. If it's not convenient for fellow Taoist Kai to enter with Junior, then Junior has nothing to say. When Kai Zhuoxia saw Xiao Hua's magnanimous expression and spoke without hesitation, the trace of hesitation in her heart disappeared. She smiled and said, Since I took the initiative to invite fellow Taoist Xiao half a year ago, how can I refuse this time? Moreover, with fellow Taoist Zongbao here, what do I have to be afraid of? As she spoke, Kai Zhuoxia smiled like a flower and turned to look at Li Zongbao. Li Zongbao smiled and nodded slightly. He turned to Xiao Hua and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, do you still remember what I said to you in the Royal Fong Mountains? All honest words have to be kept in your heart. If you tell the whole truth, you won't have the opportunity first. If you're not being schemed against, then you won't be able to refuse. Xiao Hua's face was full of smiles. He bowed and said, Junior is untalented. I'll have to rely on seniors to guide me on this trip to the Thousand Zhang Peak. Forget it, forget it. You're so open and above board that you're practically better than I, a disciple of the utmost happiness faction. If you don't explain, how would I know that you're a rogue cultivator? Li Zongbao flicked his big sleeve and said, Fellow Taoist Zhuoxia, let's go in. After we enter, fellow Taoist Xiao will tell I in detail about Shang Huoming and Tianqi. I'm very interested in this Tianqi. Interested in Tianqi? Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. Suddenly, a thought appeared in his mind. This Li Zongbao, I'm afraid he didn't come to the Thousand Zhang Peak purely to escort Kai Zhuoxia, right? Yes, fellow Taoist Zongbao. As Kai Zhuoxia spoke, she urged the magic power in her hand. The light green jade artifact emitted a light green brilliance. The beast's shape gradually became vivid. In the blink of an eye, the little beast formed by the brilliance suddenly jumped up and flew towards the top of the Thousand Zhang Peak. Li Zongbao and the others didn't dare to be negligent. They flew up and chased after it. When they were about to reach the top of the mountain, the light green little beast entered one of the caves and disappeared. Li Zongbao and the others were extremely fast and also went in. When Xiao Hua and the others flew into the Thousand Zhang Peak, the entire Thousand Zhang Peak returned to its usual silence. Another half a day passed. When the sun set in the west, hundreds of thousands of cultivators suddenly appeared with the Thousand Zhang Peak as the center. Then they all flew into the air and swarmed towards the Thousand Jong Peak. Looking at the clothes of these cultivators, they were not uniform and had different styles. Moreover, their cultivations were all around the 4th or 5th level of qi refining. There were very few above the 5th level. They were the rogue cultivators Xiao Hua had been waiting for. On the east side of the Thousand Jong Peak, under the red light of the setting sun, Ma Qingqing and a few other rogue cultivators were accompanying Qing Fengmin. Qing Fengmin's thick black eyebrows were especially bright under the sunlight. His bright red face was even more oily. His eyes were looking around with great satisfaction. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, looking extremely proud. Fellow Taoist Qing, this Thousand Jong Peak treasure hunt is really a big deal. It looks like the situation is comparable to the Ink Shadow Black Forest. Ma Qingqing's face was also filled with excitement. He couldn't help but say, more than that, the requirements of the Ink Shadow Black Forest are very high. The number of fellow Taoists who can participate is still limited. How can it be compared to this time? Only fellow Taoists with some cultivation can participate. Fellow Taoist Qing can be said to be beneficial to rogue cultivators. Another fat cultivator beside him echoed. Qing Fengmin smiled proudly. Then, a trace of pity appeared on his face. He waved his hand and said, "Alas, I know that we rogue cultivators are in a difficult situation. I want to give ordinary fellow Taoists more opportunities. But, after all, there's only the legacy of the Thousand Jong old man. There are too many monks and too little gruel. If all the rogue cultivators abandoned by the heavens come, it will definitely attract the covetous eyes of some other sections. So, I set up some thresholds." Another cultivator with sparse hair and a sloppy Taoist robe said with a smile, "In the cultivation world, it has always been natural selection. If everything was 100% certain, wouldn't the sky be filled with flying immortals? Fellow Taoist Qing, you don't have to blame yourself. But, alas, some places are really cruel. In I's group, 6 out of 10 fellow Taoists died in dangerous places." Ma Qingqing looked at the approaching rogue cultivators and sighed. "I'm afraid the other fellow Taoists are also like this, right?" Qing Fengmin listened and did not answer. He squinted his eyes and looked at the Thousand Jong Peak in the distance. In the light of the setting sun, 2 faint flames were burning in his eyes. After flying for another incense stick's worth of time, Qing Fengmin, Ma Qingqing, and the others arrived in front of the 100 Jong Peak. Qing Fengmin stopped and looked at the last ray of sunset before asking, "Fellow Taoist Ma, the time is just right? Fellow Taoist Qing, it is the time agreed in the silk bag." Ma Qingqing raised his head and looked in the distance. All the rogue cultivators were flying in the air around them, eager to have a try. Is there a fellow Taoist who is not abandoned by the heavens? Fellow Taoist Qing, there is more than one token of the Thousand Jong old man. Some are real and some are fake. Every year at this time, some fellow Taoists who have obtained the token will come. Just now, I'm afraid there are dozens of other sects or rogue cultivators who are not abandoned by the heavens. Yes, I left a message in the silk bag. After telling them the location of the Thousand Jong Peak, I told them not to arrive first. Just wait for sunset. The rogue cultivators of the heavens will come together. Even if we encounter other cultivators, we have the advantage in numbers. There is no need to be afraid. Qing Fengmin said with a smile. How do we enter? Please tell us, fellow Taoist Qing. Ma Qingqiang cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoist Ma, you send a voice-transmitting talisman and gather the fellow Taoists who open the last silk bag in each group. The other fellow Taoists will be divided into 20 groups. Yes, I will do it right away." Ma Qingqiang nodded and waved to the several cultivators behind him. Everyone followed. Chapter 1386. In a cave near the top of the Thousand Jong Peak, Xiaohua followed Li Zongbao and Kai Zhuoxia into the cave. He saw the light, green jade object on the ground of the cave, looking dull. Xiao Hua saw Kai Zhuoxiao pick up the strange-looking jade beast and said curiously, "This thing, why did it fall down after leading us to the cave? I thought I could find 1,000 zhang old man's inheritance by flying with it. If that's the case, we can just find a cave and enter it." He, fellow Taoist Xiao, is thinking too simply. Kai Zhuoxiao put the jade beast in her storage bag and said with a smile, "I won't hide it from fellow Taoist Xiao. This jade beast was obtained by I in the Royal Imitation Mountain Range. It was also because of this that I was chased by Pai Lon and the twin bears. I didn't tell fellow Taoist Xiao the truth that day, so I hope fellow Taoist Xiao can forgive me." Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Fellow Taoist Kai is overthinking. Fellow Taoist told I the time and place, and even brought I to the 1,000 zhang peak. Isn't this telling the truth to I? How could I not know the severity of the matter? Fellow Taoist Xiao is right. That day, I didn't know fellow Taoist's identity, and I was afraid that it would cause some misunderstanding between us. I invited fellow Taoists to come here to return a favor. Kai Zhuoxiao nodded and explained, "Fellow Taoist Xiao should also know that the 1,000 zhang old man was good at refining pills and refining tools. Before he passed away, he hid his inheritance in the 1,000 zhang peak and refined some strange jade beasts. These jade beasts are both real and fake. Only one of them can lead the fated person into the real treasure cave and obtain the old man's inheritance. As for this jade beast, it said that its function isn't to lead the cultivator to the real treasure cave, but to guide the cultivator at a crucial time. For example, there are probably hundreds of caves on the 1,000 zhang peak, and it must be mountain paths crisscrossing inside. It's very complicated. This jade beast only points out the location of the cave, and after we enter the cave, we have to rely on ourselves. The 1,000 zhang old man died about 1,000 years ago, but until now, many cultivators have obtained this green jade beast, but I've never heard of anyone inheriting the old man's inheritance. Furthermore, this jade beast appears every year." Li Zongbao said leisurely, "This legend is really wonderful. If I didn't have the complete cultivation method of the Utopia faction, perhaps I would also covet it." Fellow Taoist Zongbao, since you've accompanied I here, how can I let you return empty-handed? If you can find Old Man 1,000 Feet's legacy and alms bowl, you can take whatever you like." Kai Zhuoxiao said with a smile. When Xiao Hua heard this, the expression on his face didn't change, but in his heart, he was slightly worried. He originally thought that since Li Zongbao came here to accompany Kai Zhuoxiao, he wouldn't care about the 1,000 zhang peaks things. He might even be able to get something from Kai Zhuoxiao. But if Li Zongbao also wanted to divide it, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to obtain any benefits. "Forget it. Since I'm following her, I'll just let it be." Xiao Hua comforted himself. "Thank you for your kindness, fellow Taoist Zhuoxia," Li Zongbao said with a smile. "However, searching for treasures depends on fate. Although the three of us came here together, maybe each of us has different encounters. If the three of us find something in the 1,000 zhang peak together, I will definitely compensate you too if I take it. No, we still need fellow Taoist Zongbao to take care of us along the way. Let fellow Taoist Zongbao make the decision first." Kai Zhuoxiao hurriedly declined. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly in his heart and didn't say anything. Seeing the two of them giving way to each other, it seemed that he was an extra person and was very embarrassed. In fact, wasn't that the case? Li Zongbao didn't seem to want to talk to Kai Zhuoxiao about this. He glanced at Xiao Hua, then at the pitch-black cave in the distance. He took out 3 moonstones and gave them to the two of them, saying, "It is said that the path to the cave is long and winding. Fellow Taoist Xiao, if there is nothing wrong, please tell this humble Taoist and the others about your situation in the past 6 months." This humble Taoist is very curious as to how Shang Huoming suddenly disappeared. Yes, I'm also very curious. Fellow Taoist Xiao, you haven't broken through to the first layer of the aura refining realm. How did you suddenly break through to the 3rd layer of the aura refining realm after coming out of Shanghuaming. Kaizhuxia also clapped her hands and applauded. Xiaohua frowned. This kind of matter, he really didn't want to tell others about it. However, he immediately had an idea. Perhaps being on good terms with Li Zongbao and gaining his sympathy might be beneficial for my revenge. Moreover, it's a bit strange for Qing Fengmin to give the Jade Beast to Jiang Huanqi for no reason. If I tell them, it might arouse their suspicions. Thus, Kaizhuo led the way, Xiao Hua stood in the middle, and Li Zongbao brought up the rear. As the three of them slowly walked into the Thousand Zhang Peak, Xiao Hua slowly told them about his situation. In another cave on the Thousand Zhang Peak, Jiang Huanqi of Shanghua sect was also pleasantly surprised. He picked up the green jade beast from the ground and carefully examined it in front of his eyes. He laughed softly and said, "That old thing abandoned by the heavens really has eyes but can't see the good stuff. He can only be a rogue cultivator for the rest of his life. He already has the token of the Thousand Zhang Peak, but he actually gave it away to someone else. I deserve my heaven-defying luck." Not only did I obtain the exquisite grass, but I also have the opportunity to obtain a golden core cultivation method. As long as I bring these things back to the sect, do you think the elders won't reward me handsomely? Afterwards, he carefully put away the jade beast, took out the moonlight stones, and slowly walked along the mountain path under his feet. In many other caves, the same thing was happening. Every cultivator's face was filled with joy, as if they were the real, fated ones. Outside the Thousand Zhang Peak, Ma Qingsheng led 40 to 50 rogue cultivators to Qing Fengmin's side and reported, "Fellow Taoist Qing, I have brought all the fellow Taoists who opened the last silk bag. Please give me your orders." Qing Fengmin nodded and looked at the people behind Ma Qingsheng with satisfaction. He said, "Fellow Taoists, you've worked hard." Then he turned his head and pointed to another rogue cultivator that Ma Qingsheng didn't know. He said, "Before we enter the Thousand Zhang Peak, I would like to introduce a new fellow Taoist who has recently joined the Heavens Forsaken. Fellow Taoist Luo Jiesin." The rogue cultivator's face was withered and yellow. He was also at the 5th layer of qi refining. He flew to Qing Fengmin and bowed. "Greetings, fellow Taoists." After everyone returned the greeting, Qing Fengmin smiled and said to the puzzled crowd, "Actually, I should have explained to you earlier. It was because of fellow Taoist Luo that we had the opportunity to explore the Thousand Zhang Peak." It wasn't just the crowd that was shocked. Even Ma Qingsheng, a veteran rogue cultivator in the Heavens Forsaken, was slightly stunned. "Haha, I'm sure fellow Taoists are all confused." Qing Fengmin laughed. "Fellow Taoist Luo came to Jinghua City 2 months ago after I, fellow Taoist Ma, and the others returned. Fellow Taoist Luo joined the Heavens Forsaken under a condition. He didn't have to contribute any cultivation method, nor did he have to make talismans or refine pills. It was because he could take out this." Qing Fengmin patted his storage bag and took out a green jade beast. Fellow Taoist Qing, didn't you have one of these before?" Ma Qingxing was stunned when he saw the jade beast and exclaimed, "Of course, I also got this before, but I didn't expect this thing to be the token of the Thousand Zhang Peak." Qing Fengmin nodded with a smile and didn't seem dispirited. "Fellow Taoist Qing is so righteous. You actually lost an opportunity for us. We're very grateful." Han Fei stepped out from the crowd and bowed gratefully. Xiao Fenghua didn't show up. "Haha, I didn't know that day, but now that fellow Taoist Luo mentioned it, I also understood." Qing Fengmin laughed. "I also didn't expect such an ordinary thing to be the token of the legendary Thousand Zhang Peak. However, there's nothing to regret." Qing Fengmin waved his hand and said, "I lost one, but fellow Taoist Luo actually gave me 10 more." 10? Everyone was stunned. Ordinary people would be very lucky to get one of these things, but fellow Taoist Luo actually got 10 of them. This was really inconceivable. Cough, cough, I was also a coincidence. Luo Jiesin cupped his hands and said, "I found these 10 strange jade beasts in a very small market in the country of Lian. Because they didn't have any special effects, They were sold as ordinary jade pendants. Presumably, the cultivators of the country of Lian didn't know much about the Thousand Zhang Peak in the country of Shi, so no cultivator recognized them. I only spent one mid-grade spirit stone to buy them. Ah, ha ha. Everyone was stunned at first, but then they burst out laughing. I know that my cultivation is not enough, but these jade beasts, I only need one. Later, I heard about Tian Chi's good reputation, so I found fellow Taoist Qing. Luo Jiasen said with some embarrassment. Everyone was enlightened. Of course, such good things, one was the most suitable. 2 would be troublesome. If you took 10, it would be troublesome. Fellow Taoist Luo's good luck is also Tian Chi's good luck. Fellow Taoist Luo's joining is Tian Chi's opportunity. His good luck will definitely bring my strength to a higher level. Qing Fengmin laughed and said, if any of you can get the Thousand Zhang Peaks legacy, then you will be one of my future masters. At that time, don't forget about me, and don't forget fellow Taoist Luo. Okay, everyone answered loudly, as if they were all determined to get the Thousand Zhang Peaks legacy. Okay, fellow Taoists, don't be happy too early. This Thousand Zhang Peaks legend has been around for 1,000 years, and no one has ever succeeded. We just have a chance. Huh? A fellow Taoist Qing, in the past, only a few people came to get the Thousand Zhang Peaks legacy. This time, there are hundreds and thousands of us. Even if there are some difficulties, won't it be easy for us to overcome them? Ha. Fellow Taoist Ma's words are exactly what I want. It is also my creed. Isn't it our advantage in numbers? Qing Fengmin laughed and said, fellow Taoist Luo, please send out the other tokens. Fellow Taoist Ma will help. 2 teams will enter one cave. Chapter 1387. Inside the 1,000-feet peak, the mountain path was very long. Xiaohua and the others walked for nearly an hour and still couldn't see the end. Along the way, the stone walls on both sides of the mountain path were extremely dry. There wasn't any moss or the like. Occasionally, some startled bats would flap their wings and make a little noise. Apart from that, there were only the slightly hurried footsteps of the 3 people. Xiao Hua's low voice and Li Zongbao's occasional questions echoed in the stone cave and traveled very far. Alas, fellow cultivator Zhao's experience is really pitiful. Hearing that Xiao Hua's Shang Huaming had been inexplicably destroyed by the 100 Herbs sect, Kai Zhuoxia was very sympathetic. This 100 Herbs sect is really shameless. On one hand, they used the banner of the Alliance. On the other hand, they secretly attacked. Actually, this kind of method is not the first time in the cultivation world. It can only be said that sect leader Xiao was too rigid and couldn't accept many disciples. This was why he lacked help at the critical moment and was taken advantage of by the 100 Herbs sect. In the end, Li Zongbao shook his head slightly. In the cultivation world, the most important thing is strength. It's like this for individuals, and even more so for sects. Every day, countless cultivators died, and countless cultivators stepped into the Qi refinement realm. At the same time, no one knew how many sects had been established and how many had perished. Even if my Utopia faction didn't work hard and increase our strength, I'm afraid that in 100 or 1,000 years, we would also end up like this. After pondering for a moment, Li Zongbao said again, if there's no other reason, fellow cultivator Xiao, the destruction of Shang Huaming was probably done by the 100 Herbs sect. But as for the 10,000 Poison sect attack, and then no news, I can't guess the reason. As for Shang Huaming, fellow cultivator Xiao, I'm afraid you can only think of a way. The other sects have no reason to stand up for Shang Huaming. That's right. Unless your sect master Xiao has an extremely close senior, and this senior has the power to destroy 100 Herbs Gate. Oh, and your senior sister Xiao also has to step forward. Kai Zhuoxia agreed. Sigh. Xiao Hua sighed softly. At this point, how could Xiao Xinrui stand out? Kai Zhuoxia was silent for a moment before she asked, by the way, as fellow Taoist Xiao said, fellow Taoist Zongbao, Qing Fengmin is really interesting. On one hand, he casually gave away Old Man 1,000 Feet's keepsake. On the other hand, he organized a group of rogue cultivators to search for Old Man Thousand Feet's legacy. On the other hand, he created so many mysteries. Is he so confident that he'll be able to find Old Man Thousand Feet's legacy? I don't know. Li Zongbao shook his head slightly. If something is out of the ordinary, it must be a demon. So many loose practitioners from Heaven Forsaken came to look for Old Man Hundred Zhang's technique, but over 100 of them entered a cave. Speaking of this, Li Zongbao's heart flashed, and he whispered in surprise, "Oh, could it be that Qing Fomin has more than one token? Was that why he was willing to give one away?" Moreover, he was able to gather all the rogue cultivators in Heaven Forsaken. Of course it's true. Kai Zhuoxia covered her mouth and laughed. Fellow Taoist Zongbao is indeed amazing. I never thought of this kind of situation. Hearing this, Xiaohua was somewhat speechless. He had long seen many cultivators each take a light green brilliance and enter different caves. In his heart, he faintly guessed that Qing Fomin would have more than one jade beast. Presumably, Kai Zhuoxia had been scheming for a long time. She even knew that his great strength was advantageous to her in treasure hunting. So how could she not know that he had more than one jade beast? Li Zongbao smiled but didn't answer. Xiaohua felt that the atmosphere was somewhat awkward. He was already somewhat regretting it now. It would have been better if he had followed Li Zongbao into the cave. In the somewhat ambiguous conversation between the two people, he was really out of step. He only heard Li Zongbao sigh and say, "Actually, I came to this Thousand Zhang Peak." Xiaohua stared blankly and said inwardly, "This Li Zongbao came to this Thousand Zhang Peak. Could it be that there's some other reason?" Just as Xiaohua was about to ask, Kai Zhuoxia cried out in pleasant surprise in front of him, "Quickly look! The cave is at the end." Xiaohua raised his head and looked. Sure enough, in front of Kai Zhuoxia's moonstone was a rather large pitch-black space. "Wait a moment," Li Zongbao shouted in a low voice, and his figure flew in front of Kai Zhuoxia. It turns out that it can fly. I thought we could only walk." Xiaohua secretly curled his lips in his heart. He had always been very curious why they didn't use the flight talisman. He thought that they couldn't fly. Li Zongbao flew to the front and swept his divine sense. He clearly saw the situation inside the space, and then said, "And it seems that this is the key to finding treasures." As he spoke, he clapped his hand and took out a few moonstones from his storage bag. He casually threw them, and they were embedded in the stone walls of the space. When Xiaohua walked into this space, he clearly saw the situation around him with the help of the moonstone's brilliance. This was an oval space of about 10 feet. On the stone wall opposite Xiaohua, there were 3 similar stone caves. Each stone cave was tightly blocked by a stone door. Xiaohua knew that Li Zongbao had already used his divine sense to check the entire space, so he followed Kai Zhuoxia to the front of the 3 stone doors with ease. First, he looked at the 3 stone doors with his naked eyes. Kai Zhuoxia frowned slightly, turned her head and said, "Fellow Taoist Zongbao, can you see the clues of the stone doors?" Li Zongbao smiled bitterly. "I've already seen it with my divine sense. The 3 stone doors are not different from the stone doors. They're exactly the same." Xiaohua bit his lips and said, "Seniors, we have been in the stone cave for a long time. According to the way we have been going down, we should have already gone deep into the ground. The sudden appearance of 3 stone doors, isn't it a little strange?" Kai Zhuoxia suddenly patted her forehead and said, "Fellow Taoists, please wait a moment." Soon after, Kai Zhuoxia patted her storage bag and took out the jade beast she had just used. Sure enough, as soon as the jade beast was taken out of the storage bag, it immediately emitted a light green brilliance and flew out of Kai Zhuoxia's hand. It flew straight to the middle of the stone door and stuck to a dent in the stone door, motionless. When Xiaohua looked at it, sure enough, the stone door was in the shape of a strange beast. The jade beast was embedded in the stone door and fit perfectly. Anyone would know that this stone door was the place they should go. Fellow Taoist Xiao, Kai Zhuoxia turned her head and said, "It is said that this stone door can only be opened by someone with great magic power or unparalleled strength. So, I asked fellow Taoist Xiao to help." "And I know." Xiao Hua responded indifferently. He walked to the front and looked up and down. There was a dent about 3 inches below the stone door. It seemed to be the place where the stone door could be raised with one's hand. "Wait a moment, fellow Taoist Xiao," Li Zongbao shouted in a low voice. "What?" "Fellow Taoist Zongbao," Kai Zhuoxia said curiously. Li Zongbao ignored her and walked to the front of the stone door. He looked at the 3 stone doors again and again before stopping in front of the stone door in the middle. First, he carefully looked at it with his naked eyes, then swept it a few times with his divine sense, and whispered, "Fellow Taoists, please step back a little." After Xiao Hua and Kai Zhuoxia stepped back a few steps, Li Zongbao took a deep breath and circulated the true qi in his body. He urged his magic power, made a gesture in his hand, and hit the stone door. The stone door made a zhi-la sound. As Li Zongbao poured his magic power into it, the stone door actually slowly rose up. Seeing this, Kai Zhuoxia's face showed joy, but before her smile stayed on her face for half a moment, Li Zongbao's face turned dark red. The stone door first made a kacha sound and stopped there. Then, with a loud poochie sound, the entire stone door fell to the ground quickly, stirring up a cloud of dust. "Fellow Taoist Zongbao." Kai Zhuoxia was worried and hurriedly asked, "I am fine." Li Zongbao shook his head and said, "This method of exchanging magic power for strength, I am not proficient in it. I am afraid that only Foundation Establishment cultivators can open it." "No way." Kai Zhuoxia immediately smiled bitterly. "If only Foundation Establishment cultivators can open it, who would come?" "Hee, I only said the stone door. Moreover, I did not prepare the stone door giant strength talisman. I am afraid that this stone door will require fellow Taoist Zhao's strength," Li Zongbao said with a smile. "And 2 seniors, please wait a moment. Let this junior take a look." As Xiao Hua spoke, he walked to the front of the stone door and placed his hand in the groove of the stone door. He exerted strength with one arm, and the stone door creaked as it was lifted up by him bit by bit. "Fellow Taoist Zhao's strength is amazing," Li Zongbao also praised. Strangely, after Xiao Hua lifted the stone door into the air, it did not fall down again. A gust of mountain wind blew out from behind the stone door, causing the robes of the 3 people to flutter. If you like this work, you're welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for it. Chapter 1388. In fact, ever since he entered the cave, Xiao Hua had some doubts in his heart. He had long wanted to find a chance to separate from the 2. Not to mention that the 2 chattering made Xiao Hua a little uncomfortable. The key point was that following the 2, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to get any benefits. Now that he had a choice, Xiao Hua faintly felt that the mountain wind from the middle of the cave was somewhat bloody. This kind of bloody smell wasn't smell from the mouth and nose, but from a kind of instinct. After hearing Li Zongbao's words, Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said, "Many thanks to the 2 seniors for your guidance. This junior doesn't dare to have too many extravagant hopes for the 1,000 feet old man's legacy. I'll just walk around casually and get some other things, and I'll be satisfied." Seeing this, Kai Zhuoxia didn't urge him to stay. She nodded and said, "I understand fellow Taoist Zhao's meaning. Since it's fellow Taoist Zhao's choice, then, I can only respect it. I hope fellow Taoist Xiao will be careful. We'll meet again after we leave the 1,000 feet peak." Li Zongbao also looked at Xiao Hua and nodded slightly, saying, "Fellow Taoist Xiao, be careful." Then, Li Zongbao followed Kai Zhuoxia into the cave. When the 2 disappeared into the darkness and the moonlight disappeared, Xiao Hua looked around and casually walked to the cave on the right. Outside the 1,000 feet peak, Luo Jiasin took out 9 light green jade beasts from his storage bag. Everyone's eyes were wide open. Even Ma Ching-chung couldn't hide the excitement in his heart when he took the Jade Beasts and flew to the front of each team to give the Jade Beasts to the temporarily appointed team leaders. Ching Fengmin clapped his hands and said, "Well, fellow Taoists, use your magic power to activate the Jade Beasts in your hands. The Jade Beasts will guide you to the correct cave. It's best not to fly inside the cave. It's said that if you walk slowly, you can avoid some of the restrictions inside the cave." As soon as his voice fell, the 9 Jade Beasts almost simultaneously turned into light green brilliance and flew to different places on the 1,000-foot peak. Several of them even went around to the other side of the 1,000-foot peak. How could heaven-forsaken's itinerant cultivators be courteous at this time? Each of them activated their flying talismans and flew towards the 1,000-jong peak. However, there were too many itinerant cultivators following behind each light. When they entered the cave one by one, it still took a lot of time. "Everyone, it's time for us to enter." Ching Fengmin looked at the surrounding people and threw the Jade Beast in his hand with a smile. A pale green light flew towards the top of the 1,000-jong peak and entered the cave that was very close to the cave that Xiaohua and the others had entered. Ching Fengmin activated the flying talisman, and the dozens of people around him followed. When everyone entered the cave, the whole sky was already dark, and the sound of the wind was everywhere. It was quiet, as if nothing had happened. Xiaohua entered the cave. Since Kai Zhuoxiao wasn't leading the way in front, he held the moonstone to his left and right. He also took out a stack of fireball talismans and held them in front of his chest. His eyes were fixed in front of him, ready to shoot out a fireball if there was any sudden change. However, after walking for the time it took to finish a meal, the entire mountain path was still quiet, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. Is this just an ordinary cave? Xiaohua slightly furrowed his brows, feeling somewhat unresigned in his heart. Right at this moment, an extremely short, sharp howl suddenly rang out. Approximately 30 meters in front of Xiaohua's head, the howl was fleeting. Xiaohua was startled to the point that the hairs on his body stood up. This howl was really sudden and also really sinister. "I'm afraid there's going to be a good show." Xiaohua took a deep breath and narrowed his eyes. He held the fireball talisman in his hand a few times, slowed down his pace, and steadily walked forward. In just a moment, Xiaohua was close to the place where the sound came from. However, to Xiaohua's surprise, this was only a crossroads. The left, right, and the front were all exactly the same caves, and he didn't find anything out of the ordinary. Xiaohua, whose heart had already been stretched taut, saw this situation and couldn't help but be startled. He stood there for the time it took to drink a cup of tea, looking left, right, front, and back. Then he walked towards the cave in front of him. However, just as he was about to take a step, a sharp sound of wind came from behind him. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly turned around. However, there was nothing behind him. In the light of the moonstone, it was just as silent as when he passed by. The sharp sound of wind just now was inexplicably gone. "Strange," Xiaohua secretly cried out in alarm. Then he took out a few iron cloak talismans, weak water talismans, and other talismans from his storage pouch and used them on himself. Then, Xiaohua walked forward while paying attention to his surroundings. After half a meal's time, nothing happened. However, in front of Xiaohua's eyes, there were 2 identical mountain paths, one to the left and the other to the right. This time, Xiaohua had no choice but to make a choice. However, the 2 mountain paths didn't give him much of feeling. Therefore, he could only casually choose the mountain path on the left and walk in. However, this mountain path was very short. In less than the time it took for an incense stick to burn, there was no road in front of him, revealing a space of about 1 zhong. 1 zhong equals 33 m. There was nothing in this space, only the ground was very smooth. Xiaohua held the moonstone and looked at the stone walls around him. He didn't find anything out of the ordinary. He couldn't help but sigh and say to himself, "Could it be that I've really reached the end?" But just as Xiaohua was about to leave, he suddenly woke up with a start. He immediately raised the moonstone up high and looked up. Sure enough, about 1 zhang above Xiao Hua's head, at the top of the space, there was actually a blood-red pattern. Ah! Xiao Hua was shocked. His hair stood on end again. Without hesitation, he urged his magic power and flew out of the space. In a few breaths' time, he had crossed the distance of several zhang. When Xiao Hua's heartbeat gradually stabilized, he fell from the sky. The blood-red pattern still remained in his mind. That pattern was very strange. It could be said to be a human shape, but the whole body of the pattern was like a blood-red cloud. It couldn't be said to be a human shape, but the 4 corners and the head of the cloud were like hands, feet, and a head. What was special was that the 2 eyes on the head were exactly the same as a human's. How could there be such a strange thing in the 100 Zhang Elder's 100 Zhang Peak? Xiao Hua walked back while frowning. What Xiao Hua didn't know was that as soon as he flew out of the space, the blood-red cloud wriggled. Its 2 eyes faintly lit up. It even rotated for a moment. When it saw that there was no one in the space, it stopped. At the same time, Shanghua Sec's Jiang Huanqi also stepped into the space with a sword talisman in his hand. Unlike Xiao Hua, as soon as Jiang Huanqi entered the space, the jade beast he had been holding tightly in his hand immediately broke free from his hand. It turned into a pale green light and flew up. On top of Jiang Huanqi's head, there was also a blood-red pattern. The light that the jade beast turned into rushed into the blood-red pattern and immediately disappeared. When Jiang Huanqi woke up, he raised the moonstone and saw that the blood-red pattern had already wriggled. Seeing the blood-red color, Jiang Huanqi was as shocked as Xiao Hua. He swung his hand, and the sword talisman in his hand immediately pierced out. At the same time, Jiang Huanqi urged his spiritual power and prepared to fly away. However, he was already too late. The sword talisman pierced into the blood-red mist without any reaction. The blood-red mist covered the entire space with a bang. Jiang Huanqi's body, which had just flown into the air, was also covered by the blood-red mist. A scream was heard. It seemed that there was an irresistible pain. Jiang Huanqi's body quickly shrank and slowly disappeared. The same situation happened frequently in the different caves of the 1,000-Feet Mountain. Every time a cloud of blood mist appeared, there would be a miserable scream. This scream was so heart-wrenching that it was as if a person's soul was being violently attacked. However, each space was very far away, so the screams only traveled a short distance before disappearing. Did you hear that? It seems like someone is screaming. Li Zongbao suddenly stopped and said to Kai Zhuoxia beside him, "Oh, is that so?" Kai Zhuoxia, who was mostly focused on Li Zongbao, was stunned. She pricked up her ears, but the surroundings were still dead silent. There was no sound. "Fellow Taoist Zongbao, I didn't hear anything," Kai Zhuoxia said curiously after a while. "Maybe I misheard?" Li Zongbao frowned slightly. The two of them walked for a while. Li Zongbao smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Zhuoxia, I'm afraid we've reached the place in front." Is that so?" Kai Zhuoxia's face was filled with joy. She said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Zongbao, what did you see?" But immediately, Li Zongbao scanned the space in front of them with his spiritual sense. He said hesitantly, "It's very strange. There's nothing in the space in front of us. Could it be that our jade beasts aren't real?" As they spoke, the two of them entered the space. The space was extremely spacious, and the moonlight wasn't able to illuminate it completely. Before Kai Zhuoxia could take a good look at her surroundings, the jade beast in her hand suddenly flew into the air. "Ouch!" Following Kai Zhuoxia's exclamation, Li Zongbao hurriedly scanned the space with his spiritual sense. A strong smell of blood came from the blood-red pattern. "Oh no!" Li Zongbao exclaimed in his heart. He scanned the pattern with his spiritual sense and sensed that something was very wrong. Before he could call Kai Zhuoxia, Li Zongbao slapped his hand and took out a small jade bottle from his storage bag. His right hand made a series of gestures to activate his spiritual power. Seeing the thick blood fog above them, Li Zongbao shouted, "Quick!" His right hand made a gesture and hit the jade bottle. With the help of his spiritual power, the jade bottle suddenly emitted a pure blue light. After a few flashes, a round blue light spurted out from the mouth of the jade bottle. It was just enough to hold the blood fog and protect Kai Zhuoxia and Li Zongbao. Fellow Taoist Zongbao, Kai Zhuoxia exclaimed and leaned towards Li Zongbao involuntarily. Don't panic. I'm afraid we've fallen into a trap, Li Zongbao said calmly. He pulled on Kai Zhuoxia's sleeve, and the two of them began to walk out of the space. But at this moment, the two eyes in the blood-red pattern flashed with a bloody light. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.